Sarah Young looked out through the large glass window of her penthouse in New York, the city sprawling, vibrant and alive, full of lights and life. In other times, this pulsating urban scene would have brought her immediate comfort, reminding her of how aligned her life was with the dreams she had cultivated over the years. Yet now, the city's glow was insufficient to fill the emptiness she felt. Her gaze slowly drifted to the corner of the room, where Noah was bent over the dining table, surrounded by piles of papers and his laptop, which displayed dozens of legal documents. Sarah and Noah had been married for 2 years, and although everything had begun with passion and promises for the future, it seemed that, over time, challenges not only grew but also took root deep in both their hearts. Noah was a dedicated lawyer, and Sarah, the sole heiress of Young Industries, a multi-million-dollar investment and technology company. The two had met unexpectedly, as if fate had tirelessly worked to bring them together despite the differences that, over time, would become almost insurmountable barriers. For Noah, being married to Sarah was like living between two distinct worlds. He deeply loved his wife, but never stopped feeling the weight of the responsibility and expectations that came from belonging to the Young family. Each family event was an exercise in patience and restraint. The judging looks, fake smiles, and subtly condescending comments he received from Sarah's mother and father were masked by polite smiles but laden with judgment. Despite his professional achievements, Noah couldn't shake off the feeling of inadequacy that seemed to surround him in every interaction. He constantly wondered if he would ever be truly accepted, or if his worth would always be tied to something he could never be or have. On the other hand, Sarah, although aware of the difficulties Noah faced, also felt unable to bridge the chasm that seemed to grow between them. Raised amid privileges and accustomed to luxurious environments, she always saw her place in society as something natural and inevitable. Initially, Noah had won her over by being different from all the men she had known. He was honest, determined, and didn't hesitate to challenge her instead of simply agreeing for convenience. Sarah had fallen deeply in love with this independence, with the resolute spirit that made Noah question the rules and limits imposed by her family and status. However, over time, the differences that once united them now seemed to push them to opposite sides. Sarah realized, as she continued to watch Noah from afar, that he was oblivious to her presence in the room, completely absorbed in his work. It was a scene that repeated alarmingly often. Noah spent endless nights dealing with cases from the office, barely paying attention to what was happening around him. Sarah often wondered if he was avoiding spending more time with her, or if it was simply the relentless nature of his profession. She vividly remembered how he had promised her early on that his dedication to work wouldn't affect their marriage. Yet here they were, living as strangers under the same roof, the silence between them growing like a menacing shadow. That night, Sarah decided to break the silence. She approached slowly, the words weighing on her mind as she thought about how to start a conversation that had seemed inevitable for months. As she neared the table, Noah looked up quickly, surprised by her closeness, but soon turned his attention back to the laptop. Sarah felt slightly offended by his disregard, but she swallowed her irritation and instead pulled a chair beside him. "Noah, we need to talk," she began, trying to sound firm, but her voice faltered slightly, revealing the vulnerability she tried to hide. He sighed, clearly uncomfortable with his wife's tone. He knew this wouldn't be a light conversation, but he was exhausted, and the last ounce of patience seemed to slip away. "Can it wait a little, Sarah? I'm trying to resolve an important matter for tomorrow's case." She bit her lip, feeling frustrated, but took a deep breath and insisted, "We can't postpone this. It's important, Noah. Important for us." Those words made him pause for a moment. He closed the laptop slowly, as if bracing himself for whatever Sarah had to say. With a tired look, Noah fixed his eyes on his wife, his expression unreadable. He knew there was something wrong between them, but he always avoided it, hoping it was just a phase, a passing cloud. "I feel like we're drifting apart, Noah. I've been noticing it for a while, but today, seeing you so distant, so engrossed in your work. I can't help but wonder where we're going." Her voice trembled slightly, a reflection of everything she had been holding in for the past months. He remained silent, digesting each word. Noah knew Sarah was right, but admitting it aloud felt like a surrender he wasn't ready to make. The truth was, he always carried with him the fear that he would never be enough for her, and perhaps his dedication to work was a way to shield himself from this insecurity. "Sarah, He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I feel it too. But I thought, over time, things would settle. I thought this tension was just something temporary." She looked at him, incredulous. How could he think this growing distance was normal, or that it would simply go away without them doing anything to change it? She felt hurt, not by him, but by how they had both allowed life, obligations, and their own fears to build a barrier between them. But time isn't solving anything, Noah. On the contrary. Every day, I feel we're getting further apart. It seems like you'd rather bury yourself in work than be with me. The sincerity of her words brought tears to her eyes, but she held them back, determined to be strong. Noah closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of Sarah's words. He knew she was right, but at the same time, he felt torn between the desire to be a present husband and the weight of the expectations he placed on himself. How could he give up his struggle to be respected and valued in his profession? How could he step back now when he was finally beginning to establish himself in New York? The responsibility of being someone of value in society was a constant demand, and somehow, he feared that if he didn't push himself to the limit, he would lose the one thing he had earned on his own merit. The silence that followed between them was almost unbearable. Sarah waited for him to say something, anything, to show her that he still cared enough to fight for them. But Noah seemed lost in his own thoughts, and that only deepened the pain she felt. The truth was that, despite her efforts, Sarah was beginning to doubt that Noah would ever put her above his own ambitions. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "Sarah, I never wanted you to feel this way. But at the same time, I don't know how to balance all this. I want to be someone you can admire, someone your family can respect too." Those words hit Sarah like a blow. She had always admired him, but not because of his job or status. What she loved about Noah was the man he was, not the successful lawyer. She loved him for the way he made her laugh, for his honesty, for how he challenged her opinions and made her see the world from a new perspective. But now, the Noah before her seemed more like a stranger than the man she had fallen in love with. Maybe you should stop worrying so much about being someone for others and start being someone for us, Noah. Without waiting for an answer, Sarah stood up and left the room, leaving Noah alone. He remained seated, staring at the empty space where Sarah had been, feeling the weight of the loneliness he had created himself. The emptiness that Sarah felt was now a part of him too. Noah woke up early that morning, with the New York sun barely rising between the tall buildings, filling the penthouse with a soft orange light. He had always liked starting the day before the city's hectic movement began, feeling that the silence still belonging to the night gave him some sort of advantage. But on this day, he felt a heavier burden on his shoulders. After the tense conversation from the previous night, the distance between him and Sarah seemed sharper and insurmountable. While making coffee, his mind drifted to the dinner with her family, set for that evening. Although it was common for them to be together at the events and gatherings hosted by the Jung family, Noah always felt like he was in the position of an unwanted guest, and each interaction seemed to reinforce that feeling. Sarah's parents, especially her mother, were experts at making comments masked as kindness, but filled with judgments and insinuations. Despite all Noah's achievements in his law career, he never seemed enough for Sarah's family. Deep down, he knew much of this resistance came from his humble background. He was the son of Korean immigrants, born in a working-class neighborhood, where his parents had fought tirelessly to give him a good education. Noah grew up determined that his hard work would open doors his parents never had. And indeed, He had achieved a position of respect as a lawyer, but he always felt that the people around Sarah saw him as someone from the outside. The impression her mother left him with was always the same. No matter how hard he tried, he would never meet the standard expected for someone of the Jung lineage. During breakfast, Sarah entered the kitchen silently. She looked tired, avoiding his eyes, still sensitive to what had happened the night before. He knew the hurt she felt wouldn't disappear overnight, and a part of him wanted to apologize, but another part resisted, still held by pride. Nevertheless, at that moment, Noah wished he could dispel the tension between them. "About dinner with your family tonight," he began, hesitant but trying to sound confident. "I'll try not to be late. I think I can leave the office a bit earlier." She nodded slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. I hope you can make it. My father has been especially irritable about the Jung Industries case, and I think that's one of the reasons he asked for us both to be there." Sarah knew the evening would be challenging for Noah since her father liked to bring up corporate matters in which Noah felt out of place. And although her father knew that Noah didn't work for the company, he seemed deliberately to create an atmosphere where Noah felt ignored, constantly at a disadvantage. After breakfast, Noah prepared to leave for work, briefcase in hand and his face already adopting the focused expression he wore to tackle his intense days at the office. Sarah watched him leave, and a feeling of anguish overtook her. She wondered if he realized how the small distances created daily were slowly ruining everything they had built together. Noah arrived at the office, where he at least felt he was in his own territory. As a lawyer, he was known for his rigor and skill in negotiations, respected by his colleagues. But that acceptance didn't fill the emptiness he felt alongside Sarah. He threw himself into his cases, trying his best to forget the dinner to come. But his mind frequently returned to Sarah's comment and the subtle judgment he knew he would face. By the end of the day, he left the office with a heavy mind, barely having time to change his tie and grab a gift. Sarah had suggested a bottle of French wine to please his in-laws. When he arrived at the Jung's house, a huge mansion in one of Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhoods, Noah took a deep breath before entering, mentally preparing to face the evening. As he entered, Sarah's mother greeted him with a soft smile, but with the same evaluative look, one that seemed to examine every detail of his appearance, making him feel exposed. In contrast, her father was brief and formal in his words, immediately getting to the point of the dinner. Seated at the table, the Jung patriarch opened a bottle of wine and began discussing the future of Jung Industries, as if expecting Sarah or Noah to bring something relevant to the conversation. "Sarah, dear, I've been considering the consulting firm's proposal to expand operations in Asia. It would require a series of trips and, of course, a greater commitment. But I see that you're ready to take on that responsibility, aren't you?" She nodded, but beside Noah, she felt the tension building. She knew the conversation would follow its usual path, with her father highlighting the expectations that she would live up to the Jung name. Then, her father's gaze landed on Noah, and in an almost impassive tone, he added, "And you, Noah? I imagine you're quite busy with your work." Well, perhaps that even helps Sarah have the necessary space to dedicate herself to the company without distractions. Noah understood the jab. Though the words were spoken politely, the intent was clear. His work, his achievements, his personal effort were, to Sarah's father, distractions. He felt his blood warm and bit his tongue to avoid responding in a way that might increase the discomfort. His mind immediately recalled all the nights and weekends he had sacrificed for work, and there was his father-in-law, treating his career as something minor, an insignificant detail. Sarah watched the interaction in silence, her breath held, hoping Noah would restrain his response. He seemed about to say something, but seeing her look, he held back. Swallowing his frustration, he simply nodded, pretending to agree with his father-in-law's words. As the dinner continued, Noah remained silent, trying to mask his discomfort. However, Sarah's mother, perhaps sensing the atmosphere, decided to ask him about his family, a topic she knew was sensitive. She commented, "Noah, does your father still work as a janitor in that building in Queens? It must be inspiring for him to see how far you've come." Her tone was overly sweet, almost syrupy, but Noah could see the sarcasm. His mother-in-law never missed an opportunity to put him down, always with questions that highlighted his modest background. He smiled slightly, hiding his irritation. "Yes, my mother still works as a seamstress, and my father is still a janitor. They're very proud of what I do, even if they don't always understand the nuances of the job." Noah's brief, polite answer didn't seem to satisfy her, but he preferred to close the subject quickly. He was used to the disguised disdain that the Jung family demonstrated and knew any reaction could be used against him. At the end of the dinner, after the conversation had remained distant and cold, Sarah and Noah said their goodbyes and returned to the penthouse. The tension on the way back was palpable, but neither mentioned the discomfort that had lingered during the dinner. Back home, as he removed his coat and suit, Noah felt exhausted, not from a day's work, but from the emotional fatigue of always trying to please Sarah's family and never obtaining the acceptance he desired. Finally, Noah broke the silence, his voice laden with frustration. "Will I ever be accepted, Sarah? Will your parents ever stop seeing me as a burden?" She turned, surprised by his outburst, but understanding what he was feeling. "Noah, they don't see how hard you work and how much effort you put in. I see it, and I believe in you." He looked at her, seeking some consolation. But at the same time, a part of him felt helpless. Noah knew he would have to make a choice to preserve his love for Sarah, or let the resentment push him away from her forever. Noah and Sarah arrived at the Jung mansion for another family dinner. They both knew that the night would be pivotal, but Noah was far from predicting the impact of what was about to happen. His relationship with his in-laws was a minefield of formalities, where any misstep was interpreted as a threat. He was already mentally preparing to face the tense environment and conversations filled with hidden meanings. But Sarah was nervous, apprehensive, and he noticed this as he saw her adjusting her dress multiple times before they entered. As they were led into the dining room, the setting was impeccable. The decor carried a classic air, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and a long dining table with silver accents that reflected the opulence of the Jung family. Sarah's parents were seated in their usual positions, with her father, James Jung, at the head, holding an imposing posture and a calculating gaze. Noah always felt a tension around James, as though he might be called upon at any moment to justify his presence. James was a man of unyielding convictions and had a particular talent for making everyone around him feel small. He expected unquestionable obedience from everyone, and especially from Noah, a constant demonstration that he deserved to be at Sarah's side. Dinner began with an almost solemn silence, a few greetings and casual comments about business and investments. Noah had grown accustomed to this coldness, knowing that a warm, welcoming conversation was unlikely in such a setting. To him, each dinner with Sarah's family was an exercise in patience and self-control, and while he maintained a calm expression, the truth was that he always felt as though he was undergoing a constant test of his worthiness. After the first courses, James cleared his throat, signaling that he was about to make an important announcement. Under the table, Sarah discreetly squeezed Noah's hand, her expression revealing that she knew what was coming. James then cast a penetrating look at the two, focusing more on Sarah than on Noah. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about the future of Jung Industries," he began in a calculated, firm tone. "And I've concluded that it's time for you to take on a larger role. It's time for you to lead this company." Sarah remained silent for a moment, absorbing her father's words, but Noah noticed a spark of excitement in her eyes. She had been waiting for this chance for a long time, and now that it was finally being offered, it was an acknowledgement of everything she had always desired. However, James continued before she could respond, turning directly to Noah, as if he were an unwanted intruder in the conversation. "And Noah," James continued, his voice taking on a colder tone, For Sarah to truly dedicate herself to this new phase, she will need someone by her side. Someone who can dedicate their time to fully supporting her. And that's where you come in. The room seemed to grow even quieter, the sound of silverware ceasing as the tension became palpable. Noah swallowed hard, sensing that what James was about to say next could change his life completely. "If you truly want the best for my daughter," James went on without hesitation, "I believe you would be most helpful at her side, supporting her. The company demands total dedication, and Sarah needs someone who will be there to provide support. Someone who can handle family and social aspects while she focuses on the responsibilities of Young Industries." The implication of James's words was clear. Noah should abandon his career. He was expected to sacrifice everything for Sarah's benefit, so she would have the space necessary to lead the company. Noah felt his blood go cold. The idea of giving up everything he had worked so hard for was devastating. A blow he wasn't prepared to receive, especially in this manner, in front of Sarah's entire family, as if his career were a secondary burden. He looked at Sarah, hoping to see some reaction, some sign that she disagreed with her father's proposal. But her face displayed a mixture of surprise and a dilemma Noah knew she was struggling to hide. He had always known of Sarah's desire to take over the company, and now that this opportunity had finally arisen, she found herself torn between her love and support for her husband and her own ambition to make history at Young Industries. Noah took a sip of wine to contain the anger growing within him. He had worked so hard to earn respect as a lawyer, and now Sarah's family was proposing he throw it all away, as if his career were dispensable, as if his worth was solely that of a support for her. It was an affront to the pride and dignity he had painstakingly built, and a part of him felt betrayed by the fact that Sarah would even consider this possibility. "Mr. Young," Noah replied, controlling his tone so as not to sound disrespectful, but allowing his firmness to show. "I understand what you're proposing, but I believe I can support Sarah without giving up my career. She has always known how much my work means to me." James regarded him with a cold, impassive stare before offering a forced smile. "I understand, Noah, and I realize your career is important to you. But that's not the point. When you chose to marry Sarah, I imagine you knew she would have a greater responsibility to assume. This isn't an ordinary career. The Young name carries a weight, and the position Sarah will hold demands more than simple support. It requires total commitment. I expected you would be prepared to sacrifice, if necessary." Noah felt his father-in-law's words as a cruel blow, a veiled humiliation. He knew James saw him as an obstacle, a distraction to Sarah's success, and each word only reinforced the contempt he felt for him. He had always thought his love for Sarah would be enough to overcome the differences with her family, but here he was, placed in a situation where he would have to choose between his identity and his marriage. Sarah, watching the conflict unfolding between her father and her husband, finally found the courage to intervene. She knew that if she didn't do something, the tension would only grow, and the two most important men in her life would become declared enemies. "Dad, Noah has always supported me. He has always been by my side and helped me pursue my dreams. I don't think it's fair to ask him to give up his own," she said, trying to balance a conciliatory tone with firmness. James gave a slight smile, but it was clear he wouldn't be swayed so easily. "It's admirable of you, Sarah, but if you want to lead Young Industries, you'll have to make tough choices. Leading a company like this doesn't allow for distractions. And as I said, I thought Noah understood that, as your husband, he could make this sacrifice for you." James's final statement echoed through the room, and Sarah felt torn. She didn't want Noah to give up his career, but her father's words influenced her, making her feel that perhaps Noah's role should be supportive, a step to the side that would allow her to shine without restrictions. She felt pressured, unable to take a clear stand, and Noah could see this in her gaze, which only made the resentment in his chest grow. By the end of dinner, the three remained in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the car finally took them back home, Noah could no longer hold back his outburst. "So that's it, Sarah? You really think I should abandon my career, everything I've worked for, to be the supportive husband?" he asked, his voice revealing the pain and frustration that had been building up. She stayed silent for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. Part of her wanted to console her husband, but another part was influenced by her father's words, considering if perhaps he might be right. "Noah, I just think we need to think through everything calmly. I know my father was harsh, but you know how much this opportunity means to me." He shook his head, feeling the weight in his heart. He had always known her dream and had always supported her, but he was unwilling to erase his own life for this dream. "I have always stood by you, Sarah, but that cannot mean giving up on myself. I love you, but I also love my career and what I've built. It's unfair to force me to choose." Sarah looked at him, visibly shaken. She knew he was right, but the external pressures confused her, leaving her divided. Noah felt a growing anguish at the sight of her silent face, realizing that they were both at a dangerous impasse. After the dinner with Sarah's father, the relationship between her and Noah began to tread an even more delicate and silent path. The tension that had previously been contained now hung over them like a dense, almost unbearable mist. That morning, as they had coffee in uncomfortable silence, Noah kept his gaze fixed on his cup, lost in thought. He was determined not to give up his career, but the doubt he'd seen in Sarah's eyes during the last dinner hurt him more than he wanted to admit. She knew him, knew how much his career meant to him, yet it seemed that this no longer mattered to her as it once did. Sarah felt the weight of each unspoken word, each avoided glance. After her father's request, she wondered if Noah would truly support her as she had imagined, or if he was more committed to himself than to their marriage. She had already sacrificed certain aspects of her life to be with him and had hoped that, in a moment of such significance, he would be willing to do the same for her. Noah finally broke the silence, unable to endure the emptiness between them any longer. "Sarah, are we going to keep pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't?" She looked at him, hesitant. She wanted to resolve the situation, but the words seemed stuck, as if something within her resisted opening a dialogue that would likely end in a stalemate. "Noah, I don't know how to feel about any of this anymore," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've spent my whole life preparing for this moment, and now that it's here, it feels like you're not willing to be by my side." The implicit accusation in her words made him tense. He had been by her side from the beginning, supporting every decision and believing in her dreams. But this situation was entirely different. He wasn't willing to abandon his identity, everything he had fought to build, just to satisfy James Young's expectations. But seeing her face, something in his resolve began to waver. "Sarah, I understand how important this is to you. I really do. But why can't you and your family understand that my work is also a part of who I am? You knew this from the beginning." "Nothing's changed." She shook her head, exasperated. "But things have changed, Noah. We're at a new point now. My father was anything but subtle in saying what he expects of us as a couple. Do you think I can sustain a marriage without my husband's complete support? I'm not talking about emotional support, but practical, tangible support. I need someone by my side at every step." Noah felt a knot forming in his throat. Sarah's words struck directly at his pride and identity. It felt as though everything he had achieved was being reduced to a simple choice, as if he had to decide between his professional life and his marriage. To him, this wasn't a fair choice, and it seemed unthinkable that Sarah didn't see it that way. "So is that it? You expect me to throw everything away, as if my work were just a distraction? As if everything I've worked for up to now has no value?" His voice carried a tone of frustration he was trying to control, but without success. She looked at him, and he saw confusion and conflict in her eyes. She wanted him to understand, but she didn't know how to explain it without it sounding like an ultimatum. "I don't want you to see it as a sacrifice, Noah, but as a sign that you truly believe in me, in us." Her words echoed in his mind as he tried to understand exactly what she meant by that. He was beginning to realize that, for Sarah, this moment was a sort of test, a challenge to prove his commitment to her. But to him, the situation was far more complex than a simple test of loyalty. Without further words, Sarah rose from the table and left the kitchen. Noah remained behind, watching her walk away, feeling the distance between them grow with each passing minute. He realized that, for her, the concept of support seemed to involve giving up everything he was, and this angered him. In the days that followed, their communication became even more scarce. Both avoided deeper discussions, trying to keep the peace, but the tension had transformed into an unbridgeable chasm. Sarah began occupying herself more and more with preparations for her future role in the company, diving into expansion projects and studying the departments she would oversee. However, the idea of having Noah by her side, supporting her unconditionally, still haunted her. She felt a mixture of frustration and sadness, seeing that the man she had married seemed incapable of making a concession for them. Meanwhile, Noah, though trying to stay calm, felt increasingly pressured. At the office, his concentration was affected, and his colleagues noticed a change in his behavior. He had always been a dedicated and passionate lawyer, but now every task felt like a burden, as if, somehow, each time he dedicated himself to his career, he was betraying Sarah. It was an internal conflict that consumed him, and he began to question how much longer he could sustain the marriage if it meant giving up everything he had built. One evening, when he returned home, Noah found Sarah on a phone call with her father, discussing the company's expansion plans. She was so absorbed in the conversation that she barely noticed when he entered. It was as though he were invisible, an insignificant presence in her world, which left him feeling even more frustrated. When she finally ended the call, she looked at him, but her expression was cold, distant, as if there were nothing more to say. "So have you decided what you're going to do?" she asked, her voice carrying a forced calm he had never heard before. He looked at her, trying to control the anger he felt. "Sarah, I've already told you I won't give up my career. I can't just abandon everything I've worked for. Don't you really understand that?" she sighed, shaking her head in disbelief. "And do you really not understand that this is the opportunity of my life? I thought we were in this together. I thought you would do whatever it took to support me." Her words felt like a punch in the stomach, and Noah felt he had reached his limit. There was no avoiding confrontation any longer. "Sarah, I have always been by your side, always, but that doesn't seem to be enough for you. It seems that, for you, support means I disappear, that I become a spectator in your life." She stayed silent, processing what he had said. It was a bitter truth they both hesitated to admit, but it was becoming increasingly evident. She wanted him to be her partner, but perhaps she had expected him to go further, to give up his own life for her dreams. And he, for his part, was unwilling to abandon his career, even if it meant losing Sarah. The silence between them was broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Noah finally got up and, without looking back, left the apartment. He felt suffocated and needed space to process everything that had happened. When he returned home, it was already late and Sarah was asleep. He watched her for a few moments, noticing how distant she seemed, even lying right there. He felt like a stranger in his own home, in his own marriage. He no longer knew if he could save it, or even if he wanted to save something that now felt so fragile and empty. In the days that followed, their relationship grew even colder. Sarah immersed herself completely in her new role at the company, while Noah withdrew emotionally, focusing solely on his work and avoiding direct confrontations. They began to live as strangers under the same roof, and the distance between them seemed to grow each day. It was as if each were following separate paths, with no hope of reconciliation. As time passed, they both began to realize that they were drifting apart irreversibly. Noah felt that, no matter how hard he tried, he would never truly be accepted by her family. And Sarah began to question if Noah would ever understand the importance of her own dreams. They still loved each other, but that love seemed increasingly distant, lost amid expectations and sacrifices that each expected the other to make. After weeks of cold silence and tense cohabitation, Sarah's routine took an unexpected turn when she crossed paths with David Lee at a finance sector conference in New York. David was her ex-boyfriend and the heir to a corporation that competed directly with Jung Industries, making him, for many, a natural adversary. They had ended their relationship years ago, but seeing him again brought back a wave of memories Sarah hadn't anticipated. David had always been charismatic, elegant, and bold, qualities that had attracted her in the past and seemed even more striking in that moment. They started with casual conversation, discussing market changes, but soon the tone became more personal. David was attentive to her every word, interested not only in her achievements, but also in what went unsaid. When Sarah hesitated while mentioning Jung Industries, David sensed something deeper. He knew her well enough to pick up on the darker undertone in her words, quickly realizing that her personal life was far from the stability she tried to display. When he casually mentioned that she deserved someone who could match her ambitions, Sarah hesitated. Part of her knew it was an inappropriate comment, but another part, a wounded, lonely part, felt an unexpected comfort in David's words. Despite knowing his intentions, his words made her reflect on her marriage to Noah and everything they had endured over recent months. She struggled to stay focused on the present, on her commitments to the company and the new position she was about to take on. But with David, she felt an unusual peace, as though he saw her for who she genuinely was, without the suffocating expectations that weighed so heavily on her. Gradually, Sarah and David's interactions became frequent, always under the guise of corporate events or industry meetings. She didn't share these interactions with Noah, and part of her didn't even feel she should, since every attempt at dialogue with her husband ended in deadlock and silence. David was the opposite. He listened, responded with implicit understanding, and sometimes even offered advice, something Sarah desperately needed. One evening, they met at an art gallery they both used to frequent in the past. With a perceptive look and a faint smile, David made a comment that caught her off guard. "Sarah, I can see you're still caught up in the weight of expectations. I thought you had moved beyond that. When I think of you, I see a woman capable of overcoming any obstacle. But honestly, I think your potential is far greater than what you're living right now." She smiled faintly, but his words left her feeling unsettled. David had always known how to touch on sensitive points in an almost casual way, and he knew she wouldn't mind facing a hard truth if it made her reflect. Sarah had never been weak or dependent, and his comment made her question why, in her marriage to Noah, she felt trapped in such a draining, limiting situation. That same night, when she returned home, she found Noah in the living room, reviewing a case on his laptop. He barely looked up as he heard the door open, so absorbed was he in his work, which only deepened the emptiness Sarah had been feeling. She wished he would notice her exhaustion, sense her discomfort, and ask about her day. She wanted to share what she had been feeling, maybe even talk about David, but Noah seemed increasingly distant, unable to see that their relationship was disintegrating with each wordless night. For his part, Noah was also troubled by the distance between them. He could sense Sarah pulling away and noticed that she avoided his gaze. She was going out more frequently and seemed increasingly involved with her new role. On some level, he knew something more was happening, but he refused to consider the possibility that she might be seeking comfort with someone else. He wanted to believe that the long hours they spent apart were just a phase, that the demanding routine and tensions they both faced would eventually pass. But the growing mistrust gnawed at his peace of mind. Weeks later, at a gala hosted by Jung Industries, Sarah and David crossed paths once again. Noah was present, but spent most of the evening involved in business conversations with other guests. Already bothered by Noah's emotional absence, Sarah felt increasingly drawn to David, who was always attentive to details and knew exactly how to engage her in interesting conversation, something Noah hadn't done in a long time. David seemed to always know what to say to uplift Sarah while still being slightly provocative. At one point, in a quiet moment between them, he commented, "You know, Sarah, I've always wondered what might have happened if we had taken different paths. Sometimes I think we shouldn't have left such important things behind." The insinuation made Sarah avert her gaze, but she couldn't ignore the impact it had. For a moment, she allowed memories of their past relationship to surface, recalling the light-hearted and fun moments they'd shared long before family responsibilities and pressures became her constant reality. With David, her life seemed simpler, free of the pressures she felt with Noah. That night, back at the apartment, Noah sensed something different about Sarah. He noticed a distance in her gaze, something that went beyond their disagreements and conflict over careers. She was there physically, but her mind seemed far away, lost in a place he couldn't reach. He tried to start a conversation, but each attempt felt more fragile and futile than the last. "Sarah, we're living like strangers. This needs to change. I don't know if I can keep going like this," he finally admitted, allowing his anguish to show. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She felt torn between her frustration with Noah and the comfortable closeness she shared with David. Part of her knew she needed to distance herself from David to save what was left of her marriage, but another part hesitated, reluctant to give up the only support she was finding outside her marriage. In the following days, David continued to approach Sarah, making it clear he was available for anything she needed, though his words often implied something more. He was never direct, but the way he treated her, the time he dedicated to listening to her, and how he seemed to understand her needs made Sarah question the path she was taking with Noah. Noah arrived at the office that morning, unable to shake off the memory of a recent night when he felt Sarah was more distant than ever. At first, he tried to ignore the growing intuition that something was wrong, but upon noticing yet another exchange of messages between her and David Lee, the calm he'd been trying to maintain began to crumble. David wasn't a stranger. Noah knew his history with Sarah and understood that he was the type who didn't mind testing boundaries, which kept Noah in a constant state of alert. He tried to rationalize his feelings and remain calm, telling himself that it was natural for Sarah to have professional relationships outside their marriage. But inside, he felt an increasing insecurity that he didn't know how to control. For days, he tried to ignore the discomfort, believing that if he kept dedicating himself to work and their marriage, things would eventually find balance. However, the weight of financial and emotional responsibilities constantly pressed down on him. Noah was investing most of his energy into maintaining the couple's financial stability, which made it all the more painful to see Sarah distancing herself, seeking emotional support from someone else. Noah's routine had turned into a constant struggle between the desire to keep up appearances and the urge to confront Sarah to understand what was truly happening. At the office, hours stretched into a repetitive cycle, and he began seeking refuge in extra activities, taking on additional cases in an attempt to keep his mind occupied and away from the suspicions consuming him. Even surrounded by colleagues and commitments, the emptiness he felt grew larger with each passing day. He knew his family hadn't fully supported his marriage to Sarah, and the pressure to be enough for her seemed to increase daily like an unsustainable weight. At the end of a long week, Noah decided he could no longer avoid confrontation and resolved to speak to Sarah about David. When he arrived at the apartment late that night, he found her sitting on the couch, typing something on her phone. She noticed his look and, without a word, placed the phone on the table. The silence between them was almost palpable, and Sarah seemed aware that something serious was about to be said. He approached, sitting next to her, taking a deep breath before he began. "Sarah, there's something that's been bothering me, and I need to talk about it," he said, trying to stay calm, though he felt nerves tightening within him. She looked at him with a mixture of apprehension and understanding, as if she had anticipated this conversation. "I've been wanting to talk to you too, Noah. I feel like we've been avoiding things we should have discussed weeks ago." He nodded, relieved that she was open to talking. However, As he searched for the right words to express what had been tormenting him, Noah felt a pang of pain, as though each word might tear a piece of his own heart. I don't want to sound controlling or mistrustful, but I need to understand what's really going on between you and David. I know he's an important contact for your work, and maybe I'm just reacting poorly, but I can't keep ignoring what I feel. I need clarity, Sarah, she sighed, her eyes drifting to the floor as she processed the situation. She knew she owed him an explanation, but also didn't want Noah to interpret it as something more significant than it was. Her relationship with David was a blend of nostalgia and friendship, a connection she didn't intend to deepen, but that still filled an emotional space Noah had stopped occupying lately. Noah, I understand what you're feeling, I really do. And I'm sorry for not being clear about my relationship with David. To me, he's just a friend and a professional contact. He's helped me understand aspects of the company that I still struggle to manage on my own. But I swear there's nothing beyond that. The relief Noah had hoped to feel from her response didn't come. Instead, he realized that her vague answer only intensified his doubts. He didn't know how to explain to her that the issue wasn't David, but what seemed to be missing between them. Noah felt that there was no longer space for him in Sarah's thoughts and emotions, that the growing distance between them had deeper roots. Sarah, I want to trust you, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. But all of this has been so difficult. I try to support you, to give you the space you need, but it never seems to be enough. And now, with David, it feels like you're looking for something I can't give you. She hesitated, feeling his words strike her with a truth she had been avoiding, even from herself. Perhaps she was indeed seeking in David a connection she no longer found in her marriage. What had once been a source of joy and security in her marriage to Noah now felt like a burden. The pressure from his family, the expectations from her own family, and the business obligations weighed on her more than she could admit. And with David, everything felt lighter, less suffocating. However, despite the relief she felt in her friendship with David, she knew that what truly mattered was her commitment to Noah. He was the man she had chosen. And although their connection had worn thin, she still saw something worth saving. Noah, I don't want you to think you're failing me. I know the pressure has been unbearable for both of us, but I can't deny that sometimes I feel lonely. I know you're trying, that you're doing everything you can for us. It's just, I feel like we've lost what once held us together. Noah felt torn between the desire to draw closer to her and the fear that the gulf between them was unbridgeable. He had always believed their love would overcome any adversity, but now, facing the fragility of their emotions, he wasn't sure if that belief was still enough. Sarah, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to save our marriage, but I can't do it alone. I need to feel that you want this too, he responded, with an intensity he couldn't conceal. She looked at him in silence, his words echoing in her mind. Sarah felt exhausted, divided between the love she still felt for Noah and the emotional freedom she found with David. She knew she needed to make a decision, but she feared what that decision might mean. Noah waited for a response that never came. She simply stood up, saying she needed time to think, and walked to the bedroom. He remained there, staring at the empty space where she had been, feeling that the distance between them was now irreversible. Sarah found herself increasingly torn over her marriage, feeling pulled between her sense of duty and an inevitable urge to move forward on her own. The idea of divorce sometimes seemed like a clear escape from the pain and confusion consuming her. She tried to focus on work on strategic decisions, numbers, goals, and expansion plans, but her inner conflict about her personal life became a constant distraction. Sarah couldn't help but get lost in thoughts about her future with Noah. The arguments and avoided glances between them were weighing on her more than ever. As time passed, the silence between them became almost unbearable, as if every gesture, every word, and every decision were steps toward an eventual breaking point. Although she often felt an overwhelming urge to flee, to end things and start fresh on her own, something held her back, a kind of emotional anchor that kept her tied to the marriage and the idea that there might still be a solution. In a moment of desperation, Sarah began to reflect on what it truly meant to love someone, on how it was possible to love and yet feel so dissatisfied. She remembered the early years with Noah when everything felt easy, and when he was not only her partner, but her best friend and confidant. The memories of days spent making plans and dreaming together stood in stark contrast to what they had become. Two strangers sharing the same space but moving in different directions. Sarah wondered if in her pursuit of professional success and independence, she was sacrificing something far more profound and essential. One evening, after a long and exhausting meeting, Sarah returned to the apartment to find Noah in his office, surrounded by documents, engrossed in work. He didn't even notice her presence at first, so focused was he on a pile of notes and legal opinions covering his desk. She stood in the doorway, watching him for a few moments. His eyes looked tired, and the expressions he made as he analyzed each document revealed an exhaustion she knew came from sleepless nights and an almost obsessive dedication. Something shifted within her, a feeling that, while nostalgic for the good times they'd had, also brought a wave of compassion she couldn't ignore. Seeing him there, she realized he was struggling just as much as she was, bearing the weight of expectations and their relationship. Noah hadn't given up, even amid all the challenges. He was still there, carrying the financial, and perhaps even emotional, responsibility that she had never truly acknowledged. Noah, still unaware of her presence, picked up the phone and made a call. She listened as he spoke confidently with a client, his tone steady and assured as he handled an important case. Despite the distance she felt from him, she couldn't deny her respect and admiration for the committed, dedicated man he was. Watching him work made her reconsider her own feelings and the way she'd been handling their situation. For all the marriage's challenges, he was the same man she'd fallen in love with. Sarah realized that maybe she too needed to fight for him. When Noah hung up the phone, he finally noticed Sarah standing in the doorway. He looked at her, surprised, but before he could say anything, she stepped into the office and sat across from him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Seeing her there, Noah felt a surge of relief and apprehension at once. He knew something important was about to be discussed, and though he wanted to resolve things between them, he also feared what Sarah might have decided. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her tone barely above a whisper, but resolute. "I know our lives have changed a lot since we got married, that things aren't the same anymore." Noah nodded, listening to each word intently, trying to grasp her true meaning. "I won't lie, Noah. I've thought about going on alone, about separating," she admitted, feeling the weight of those words as she spoke them out loud. "But seeing you, how hard you're working, how much you're dedicated to this, I realize that maybe there's still something between us worth saving. I feel trapped, but maybe the problem is more with me than with us." Noah took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Knowing she had considered divorce hit him hard, but the fact that she was still willing to reconsider gave him a thread of hope. "Sarah, I've also been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "Honestly, I don't know what I would do without you. I know I've made mistakes, that I let my own pressure and ambition drive a wedge between us. But at the same time, I never stopped loving you, never stopped believing that somehow we could find our way back to each other." She listened, his words resonating deeply. There was something in Noah's honesty and vulnerability that made all their issues and tensions feel small for a moment. Despite everything they'd been through and the pain of recent months, she knew the feelings between them were still there, hidden beneath layers of hurt and resentment. Maybe we can try. I don't want to make any promises, Noah, but perhaps if we do this together, if we're really willing to work at it, we can still find a way forward," she said. And as she saw hope rekindle in Noah's eyes, she felt a lightness in her heart. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each processing the weight of the conversation. Noah knew this was an opportunity he couldn't waste and felt a renewed determination to show. Sarah that they could overcome their difficulties. He wanted to prove he was willing to change, to do whatever it took to regain his place in her heart. Sarah, meanwhile, recognized that the true challenge would be confronting her own expectations, perhaps letting go of the idealized perfection she had held onto, and learning to appreciate what they still had. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Noah made a conscious effort to reconnect. Their conversations became more frequent, and they began sharing the frustrations and expectations that had driven them apart. She still felt conflicted about the future, but seeing Noah's efforts and understanding how much he genuinely cared gave her a renewed sense of hope. Small gestures and shared moments started to fill the spaces that once seemed insurmountable. One weekend, they decided to spend time away from New York, escaping the pressures of work in the city. They rented a small cabin in the countryside, where, for the first time in a long while, they disconnected from the outside world and focused only on each other. The tranquility of the place and the absence of usual distractions allowed them to remember the good times and to strengthen the bond that still existed between them. They talked about the plans they'd made before marriage and the dreams they once shared. Sarah realized that despite the struggles and challenges, they still had a solid foundation. Over time, Sarah's thoughts about divorce began to fade. Not all their problems were solved, but Noah's dedication and their mutual effort to rebuild the relationship started to make a difference. They would still face challenges and difficult days, but there was something stronger holding them together. That morning, Sarah woke up with a strange, lingering nausea. At first, she thought it was just accumulated stress or the fatigue from recent weeks, but as the days went by, she noticed something different. Amid the sleepless nights and tangled emotions about her marriage and career, she hadn't paid much attention to her own body, yet her suspicions began to solidify. Determined to put an end to the doubts, she stopped by a discreet pharmacy on her way to work and bought a pregnancy test. When she arrived at the office, she went straight to the restroom, hands trembling as she took the test. The minutes she spent waiting felt like hours, each second carrying the weight of everything this new possibility implied. When the result finally appeared, 2 lines indicating a positive, Sarah felt the world spin. She was pregnant. In the midst of a whirlwind of emotions, all she could do was sit quietly, trying to process what this news really meant for her life. The pregnancy felt surreal, almost as though it had happened to someone else. For months, she'd focused intensely on her career, on the pressures of taking over young industries, and on the conflicts arising with Noah. And now, suddenly, life presented her with a new, unexpected responsibility. A flood of questions emerged in the minutes that followed. How would this affect her position in the company? Could she balance all the family, professional, and personal expectations now resting on her shoulders? And most of all, how would this news change her relationship with Noah? After absorbing the initial impact, Sarah felt the urge to tell Noah, but she hesitated. She knew the news would have a massive effect on him. Lately, Noah had shown a renewed commitment to trying to salvage their relationship, but tensions and insecurities still lingered between them. She wondered how he would react. Would he see the pregnancy as a chance to heal their marriage, or would he feel overwhelmed by yet another responsibility? Sarah wanted this announcement to be something they could celebrate together, but she feared it might instead bring more complexity and doubt to their relationship. At the end of the day, after much deliberation, Sarah returned home with the test stashed in her bag, tense but resolved to tell Noah. When she arrived at the apartment, he was in the kitchen preparing dinner, a habit he'd adopted since they decided to spend more time together and rekindle their connection. She watched him for a moment, a mix of affection and nervousness filling her thoughts. He was focused on what he was doing, and seeing Noah in such an ordinary, everyday moment brought her a brief sense of comfort. After dinner, they sat on the sofa, and Sarah, her heart racing, decided to share the news. "Noah, I have something important to tell you," she began, her voice carrying a vulnerability he hadn't heard in a long time. Noah set his coffee cup aside, turning to face her attentively. "Of course, Sarah. What happened?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She took a deep breath, preparing herself to reveal what she'd been holding on to all day. I took a test today, and I'm pregnant." Her words came out softly, almost as a whisper, but they were enough to silence the room. For a moment, Noah was speechless, his eyes fixed on her as he tried to process the news. He blinked slowly, and then a range of emotions started to surface on his face: surprise, joy, and a hint of apprehension. It took a few seconds before he finally reached for her hands, instinctively intertwining his fingers with hers. "Are you serious? We're going to have a baby?" His voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability Sarah hadn't seen in a long time. She nodded, and seeing the emotion in his eyes made her own tension dissolve slightly. Noah, realizing what this truly meant, pulled her into an embrace, holding her with a tenderness and care that made the moment feel precious and fragile, as if any sudden movement might shatter it. For him, the news felt like a small miracle, something that arrived as a promise of a new beginning amid the chaos that had taken hold between them. After a few minutes, Noah pulled back slightly, searching her gaze. I can hardly believe it. Sarah, wow, it's incredible." He tried to hide the apprehension in his expression, but the shock was still there. He knew that a child would bring challenges, and especially in their current context, the impact would be even greater. Sarah smiled, but he noticed a shadow of doubt in her eyes. She was clearly still conflicted, and he understood that, for her, the implications of this pregnancy were far more complex. The role she was about to assume at the company, the pressures from her family, and the ambitions she'd always pursued placed her in an even greater dilemma than he felt. I'm happy, Noah, truly, but at the same time, I don't know how all of this will work. With the company, the position I need to take on, and now this new life." Noah felt her anguish and knew that, in that moment, more than ever, she needed him by her side. He still had concerns about how they would manage the responsibilities and financial uncertainties, but he decided not to burden her with those worries. He believed that, together, they could overcome the challenges, and he was determined to show Sarah he was capable of sharing the responsibilities and joys of the new chapter awaiting them. In the weeks that followed, the pregnancy brought a new dynamic to their lives. Sarah began taking better care of herself, avoiding excessive stress and trying to maintain a healthier routine. Gradually, Noah took on more household tasks and accompanied Sarah to her medical appointments, giving them moments of closeness that they have lost. Every ultrasound, every new piece of information about the pregnancy made him feel more connected to her and to their future child. To Noah, the baby represented a chance for a fresh start, an opportunity to rebuild their marriage and finally leave behind the uncertainties that had divided them. Sarah, however, was still torn between her corporate commitments and preparing to be a mother. She knew it wouldn't be long before her family pressured her to fully dedicate herself to her role as the Jung Industries heir, making it even harder to imagine balancing motherhood and her career. She felt an invisible weight, a responsibility to not disappoint her family, but at the same time, she feared neglecting the child who was on the way. One night, sitting alone in the dark of their bedroom and lost in thought, Sarah realized that the arrival of the baby offered her a chance to reflect deeply on what she truly wanted. While she loved the company and the possibilities her work offered, she understood that perhaps she had placed too many expectations and pressures on herself. She knew that, to build a stable and healthy life for the child and for Noah, she would need to establish clear priorities, something she had been avoiding. As the days continued to pass, Sarah and Noah gradually adjusted to the idea of a new life joining theirs. Though challenges and unanswered questions remained, the pregnancy brought a fresh perspective to their marriage. Noah began investing even more time in strengthening their relationship, making a point to demonstrate his support and presence at every moment. Despite the uncertainties, he was determined to face any adversity to ensure they were both prepared for the journey that awaited them. The pregnancy became a bridge between them, something that demanded dedication and commitment from both. And little by little, the accumulated resentments and tensions began to fade. The news of the pregnancy continued to stir up Noah's deepest fears and insecurities. Although he tried to be more present and committed to supporting Sarah every step of the way, he couldn't avoid the reflections that impending fatherhood brought. With every new checkup and each small preparation for the baby, Noah experienced a constant swing between the joy of becoming a father and the worry that the child's arrival might be only a temporary patch on the cracks in their marriage. He found himself wondering if the pressure to keep the marriage intact, now with the responsibility of raising a child, would turn him into someone he could barely recognize. One Saturday afternoon, as Sarah made a list of items for the nursery, Noah decided to confront some of his insecurities head-on. He approached her as she organized papers and store pamphlets and sat beside her on the floor. He stayed silent for a few moments, watching her choose furniture colors and fabrics, but the weight of what he needed to say finally overcame his hesitation. "Sarah, I need to be honest about something that's been bothering me since we found out about the pregnancy." He began, looking down. His voice carried a serious tone, which made Sarah stop and look at him intently. "Don't get me wrong. I'm happier than you might imagine about having a child, but I'm afraid maybe we're using this new chapter as a reason to cover up the cracks in our relationship. I don't want our child to feel the weight of our problems." Sarah felt a pang in her chest as he spoke, but she understood his words. She knew the pregnancy had caused them to focus less on the tensions between them. But deep down, she too worried that this situation would only force them to face even bigger challenges. "Noah, I understand what you're saying. I'm afraid too," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Since I found out about the pregnancy, I've been thinking about how our child will see us, about what our relationship will mean for him or her. The last thing I want is for our child to grow up in an environment where love and obligation are hard to distinguish." She looked at him, and Noah saw in her face a mix of sincerity, fear, and love that, despite being buried under layers of frustration and responsibility, still existed. His confession opened a new kind of dialogue between them, more direct and vulnerable, and Noah felt that, in some way, this moment was more honest than any other they had shared in recent months. "So what do we do?" he asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated, knowing the answer wasn't simple. She wanted them to be happy and wanted their child to be raised in an environment where love and respect felt natural, not forced. She didn't have all the answers, but an idea began to take shape in her mind. "I think what we can do is to be truly honest. Maybe this is our chance to rediscover what it really means to be partners, Noah. Not for the baby, not for the company, but for us." In the days that followed, they both made room for these conversations. Sarah allowed herself to open up about the pressures from her family and the company, revealing to Noah the inner conflicts she had kept secret. She felt torn between the expectations placed upon her and the dreams she had for her life and the family she was about to start. For the first time, she allowed herself to show the vulnerability she had been hiding, which helped Noah understand her on a level he had never reached before. Noah, in turn, shared with Sarah his daily struggle to feel secure in the marriage and the burden he carried trying to balance financial responsibility with the effort to be the husband and soon, the father she deserved. He confided his fear of not being able to emotionally sustain the family, worrying that their happiness would eventually be sacrificed in the pursuit of a stability he knew could never be fully achieved. These conversations revealed deep layers of feelings and expectations they had both avoided confronting. The pregnancy, rather than being just a practical change, became a symbol of everything they needed to face together as a couple. They began to understand that, for the marriage to truly work, they would need to learn to walk together in a more equal and empathetic way. Noah committed himself to being a more present support for Sarah, not just by taking on practical responsibilities, but by standing emotionally by her side, willing to understand and respect her decisions and dreams. Sarah, in turn, promised herself that she would value the small gestures and Noah's attempts at closeness without expecting him to be perfect. One Sunday morning, they decided to break away from their routine and went to the park, strolling and talking about the preparations for the baby and their expectations for the future. Sarah watched Noah interact with children running past, and a new vision began to take shape in her mind. She realized he had a natural sensitivity to small details, something she had overlooked for so long. And for a moment, she pictured Noah as a father, someone who could offer a sense of security she hadn't known he was capable of providing. She felt a mixture of admiration and a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Noah, noticing Sarah's gaze, felt warmth rise in his chest. In that moment, he felt understood and knew that what he and Sarah had achieved in the past few weeks was more than just a truce. It was a chance to rebuild a new beginning where they could finally accept what the other had to offer without the perfectionist expectations that had kept them locked in a tiring dynamic. When they returned home, they spent the evening discussing how they would share responsibilities when the baby arrived. This time, the conversation flowed cooperatively, and they both committed to respecting each other's limits and needs. Noah made it clear that he would not allow Sarah to sacrifice her professional dreams for responsibilities he could share, while Sarah promised him she would not let herself be consumed by the company to the point of neglecting her family. Time passed, and together they began preparing not only for the arrival of their child, but also for the new stage of life that awaited them. Noah spent the morning reorganizing old documents, trying to keep himself occupied and stave off the lingering uncertainties that still haunted him. He was in the middle of this task when he stumbled upon a thick envelope he'd never seen before, bearing the formal logo of the Jung family law firm. Although reluctant, something compelled him to open it. Curiosity, mixed with a strange unease, overpowered his caution, and Noah thought that maybe there was something in this envelope that could finally explain why he'd always sensed such resistance and disapproval from Sarah's family. Inside, he found a series of documents from years ago, dated shortly before his wedding to Sarah. It was a detailed legal contract that seemed to involve both him and Jung Industries, but what caught his attention the most were the signatures at the end. He immediately recognized his father-in-law, James Jung's, signature, and with growing shock, saw his own name and signature next to it. Confused, Noah skimmed the pages quickly and soon began to understand the nature of the document. Each line revealed the devastating truth. The contract was essentially a financial agreement between James and himself. Although he had no memory of authorizing or discussing such an agreement, he noted that the contract linked Noah to a significant sum of money, supposedly offered as support for starting his career, a type of assistance that, in reality, was disguised as a loan. Even more shocking was a specific clause tying this support to the condition that he and Sarah remain married for at least 5 years. A chill ran down Noah's spine. It was as if he were staring at a lie, a staged version of his marriage manipulated by larger forces. At the time, he had signed documents as part of a routine service agreement with Sarah's company, a seemingly standard procedure so he could assist with the firm's legal transactions. But now he saw it was a much more complex and insidious arrangement. The shock quickly turned into a bitter mix of anger and betrayal. This document meant that James hadn't just doubted him from the beginning. He had viewed Sarah's marriage as a financial transaction, something to be manipulated and controlled. Noah realized that James's reluctance and coldness hadn't been simple disapproval. They were the result of a carefully orchestrated plan to keep him under some form of control, binding his financial stability to his relationship with Sarah. The reality of it hit him with overwhelming weight, and Noah sank into a chair, feeling drained. He began to piece together the origin of every disdainful look and passive-aggressive remark from Sarah's family. James had never viewed him as someone worthy of his daughter, but rather as someone useful for strategic purposes. The contract, masked as benevolence, was a guarantee for the Jung family, a way to ensure that Noah would remain tethered to the public image and family interests, regardless of his own choices or ambitions. Discovering this truth made everything feel even crueler. After a long silence in which everything around him seemed distant and surreal, Noah stood up, his mind racing, and went to the bedroom, where he found Sarah organizing baby clothes. He approached her, the document in hand, his expression hard and his eyes clouded with pain. Sarah immediately noticed his troubled face, standing still in confusion as she waited for an explanation. "Sarah, I need to understand something," he said, trying to contain the tremor in his voice. "What exactly is this?" He held up the contract, and she looked at the document, puzzled. She took the folder, leafed through the pages, and as she realized the content, her face went pale. Sarah knew her father was ruthless in business, but she'd never imagined he would do something like this, especially involving Noah in such a manipulative way. A wave of guilt and surprise overcame her because, although she hadn't known all the details, she understood that James was capable of doing something like this to protect what he saw as the family's best interests. I didn't know about this, Noah," she said, her voice low and trembling. "I never imagined my father, that he would do something like this. I didn't know there was money involved, or this clause. I didn't know you were being treated as a commodity," he finished bitterly. "Because that's exactly how he saw me, Sarah. Someone who could help the Jung family, but never as someone worthy of respect. From the beginning, I felt there was something wrong, that he would never accept someone like me. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." Sarah felt tears threaten but knew she needed to stay calm. She realized that this discovery could be a final breaking point for their relationship, and her desperation drove her to find words that might ease the weight of what he felt. "Noah, listen to me. I never knew he had done something so calculated. I always thought his feelings for you were just resistance because of our differences. But I would never have allowed this if I'd known." He watched her, seeing the genuine regret in her eyes, but the resentment continued to grow within him like a flame he couldn't extinguish. Noah thought of how hard he'd fought to be accepted, of the sacrifices he had made to prioritize a union that now felt like a trap. "Sarah, you knew he never respected me, but you never questioned him, never shielded me from his manipulations. I know you love me, but it's impossible to ignore the fact that, to your father, our marriage was never about love. It was about control, and he used that against me without you even realizing." She looked at him, unable to respond because, deep down, she knew he was right. James had always been controlling, and out of loyalty or fear, Sarah rarely opposed his decisions. She tried to argue but knew that anything she said might come across as a defense of her father. "Noah, I understand that this is hard to accept, and I can't change what was done. But I love you, and I want you to know that for me, our marriage was never about a contract or an obligation. It was a choice. A choice I would make again, without hesitation." He shook his head, the pain still evident on his face. Though her words were sincere, Noah felt that something fundamental had broken. It was as if all the times he'd felt Sarah's family's resistance now aligned into a cruelly clear narrative, a performance in which he had never been more than a secondary actor, manipulated according to James's interests. Noah walked away, still holding the document. He locked himself in the office for hours, reliving every moment of frustration and inferiority he had experienced over the years. He thought about the daily struggle to be accepted and respected, to live up to Sarah's expectations, and now he felt betrayed, as if the foundation of everything he had built was crumbling beneath his feet. He questioned his ability to keep the marriage together, to look into Sarah's eyes and feel the same trust he once had. When Noah decided to confront his father-in-law, he was determined to make it clear that he was no longer an easy target for James Jung's manipulations. As he arrived at Jung Industries headquarters, where he knew he would find him, his heart pounded. But his anger and determination to stand up for himself were stronger than any hesitation. He remembered every moment he had been treated like an outsider, a veiled threat to the control James exerted over everything and everyone, including his daughter's marriage. Crossing through the office doors, he headed straight to James's office, ignoring the looks and greetings from the staff. He opened the door without knocking, and James's expression of surprise quickly transformed into a controlled coolness as he saw who had entered so abruptly. Noah stepped inside with the documents he had discovered in hand and tossed them onto James's desk. James looked at the papers with apparent calm, though his expression betrayed a hint of familiarity. "So this is it," Noah began, his voice laced with controlled fury. "All this time, I was part of an agreement without knowing it. Manipulated like a piece in your game, wasn't I?" James studied Noah for a few seconds before responding in a condescending tone that only intensified Noah's anger. "I thought you had some grasp of reality. Noah, did you really believe that being with Sarah and becoming part of this family would be that simple? The world of business and the Jung family isn't for just anyone." James's arrogance only fueled Noah's indignation. He had always sensed that his father-in-law saw him as inferior, but to see it laid bare like this was devastating. "I believed that love and respect would be enough to be accepted in this family. I never thought I would have to meet your financial expectations to be treated as a decent human being," Noah said, struggling to keep his voice steady, though he felt profoundly shaken. James offered a bitter smile, settling into his chair as if preparing for a rehearsed speech. "The problem, Noah, is that you never understood how the world works. I gave you an opportunity to maintain a lifestyle you otherwise couldn't have achieved. I thought I was doing the right thing, helping you provide stability for Sarah." Every word felt like a blow, and the weight of James's insinuations hit Noah relentlessly. The truth was, although he had worked hard to succeed, the Jung family's support had always loomed as a shadow, something he now realized was more a burden than a help. "Stability?" Noah countered, his voice low but charged with anger. "What you did was strip me of my dignity without giving me a chance to decide for myself. You assumed I was incapable of providing for Sarah, so you turned our marriage into a contract, a condition to satisfy your expectations." For a brief moment, James's icy demeanor cracked, revealing a hard, calculating glare. For the first time, Noah saw a flash of impatience and disdain in his father-in-law's face, as if Noah's mere presence there, questioning him, was an intolerable affront. "Sarah has always deserved the best, Noah, and I've always done everything to ensure she has a life worthy of our family. You are nothing but an inconvenient obstacle, and if I have to remind you of that, I will do so as many times as needed." The silence that followed was heavy, and Noah felt like dead weight in that room, realizing that, to James, he had always been nothing more than a disposable piece, something to be removed if he stopped being useful. Yet, the anger he felt wasn't just for himself. It was also for Sarah, who had been conditioned to adapt to this cold, manipulative worldview. Determined not to allow James to continue manipulating him, Noah raised his gaze and spoke with a firmness that surprised even himself. "Maybe it's time for you to understand that you can't control me anymore, James. I'm not part of your plans. I'm not someone you can dictate rules to or control. And more importantly, Sarah and I will find our own way, with or without your approval." The tension in the air was palpable, and the two men stared each other down in a silent challenge, each determined not to back down. Their exchanged glances were an unspoken battle, a long-awaited confrontation between pride and dignity. Suddenly, the door opened, and Sarah walked in, looking concerned and surprised to find Noah and her father clearly in the middle of an argument. She sensed the tension, and as she stepped closer, noticed the documents scattered across the desk. Her eyes quickly scanned the pages, and an expression of hurt and anger crossed her face as she realized what was happening. "Dad, is it true? You really did this to Noah?" she asked, her tone shaken, unable to hide her disappointment and anger. James merely shook his head, as if he no longer saw any point in explaining. "Sarah, I did what was best for you. I always have. If you can't see that now, you will someday." But Sarah was no longer listening to her father's justifications. The weight of his manipulation and interference in her life and marriage was unbearable, and she felt that a line had been crossed, something that could no longer be ignored. She turned to Noah, who looked back at her with an expression of pain and disbelief. In that instant, Sarah realized that the choice between following her father's standards or building something real with Noah was now staring her in the face, irrevocably. "Dad, I can't let you interfere in my life like this anymore. I chose Noah because I love him, and even if you never see it that way, he is my family now." Sarah's declaration brought Noah a momentary sense of relief, though he knew that this was far from resolving the deep issues that contract had revealed. Yet, seeing Sarah willing to confront her father and choose for herself gave him hope that, perhaps, they had a chance to start over. Seeing that he had lost the battle, James only nodded, though his expression remained cold and calculating, showing that, for him, family feelings didn't outweigh family ambitions. Noah and Sarah left the office together, knowing that, from this moment on, they would depend solely on each other to rebuild the trust and respect that James's interference had nearly destroyed. As they left the building, Noah held Sarah's hand and felt that, despite the hurts and conflicts, there was still something strong and true between them, something that manipulation and hardship hadn't managed to break. Sarah was exhausted, the weight of the recent confrontation haunting her as she tried to sleep that night. Noah's words, coupled with her own inner conflict, made it hard to find peace. With the baby on the way, she knew she needed a definitive decision, one that could create a stable and safe environment for everyone. However, her feelings for Noah and her loyalty to her family formed a complex conflict that no simple answer could resolve. In the days that followed, Sarah avoided discussions and kept her interactions with Noah limited to what was necessary, seeking some kind of balance in the silence. But without him realizing, she watched him. She noticed his effort to stay present, taking responsibility for the home, their routine, and the baby. Despite herself, it was hard to ignore the fact that he was willing to face their challenges despite everything. Still, her inner turmoil only grew. One afternoon while Noah was at work, Sarah went into the home office to organize some documents and accidentally came across a pile of his notes. Among case notes and work appointments, she found a personal journal. Unintentionally, she opened it to a page, and the first few thoughts she read were enough to reveal the intensity of his own dilemma. Noah was also torn between wanting to save their relationship and fearing that this struggle might lead him to even greater exhaustion, or worse, a relationship where neither of them could be truly happy. Those words struck her deeply. Noah had never shown his vulnerability so openly, but there, in pages written just for himself, Sarah saw how much he worried about their future, how he wondered if he could support a family without losing himself. The weight of that doubt resonated within her, and Sarah realized how much Noah had sacrificed over the years, fighting to fit into a space where he had always felt like he didn't belong. Still shaken by what she had read, she began to reflect on her own role in the situation. From the beginning, her life had been structured around her family's expectations, the meticulously planned path her father had set, and the image of success demanded by Young Industries. By choosing Noah, she had defied those expectations, but she had never truly freed herself from the emotional and financial binds her father had imposed. Sarah knew that she had been trying to juggle two different worlds, and in doing so, had placed a burden on Noah that he had never asked to carry. That night, she sat alone in the bedroom, the journal still in her hands. She thought about what it would take to truly start over, how she could finally break free from the family influences that had always shadowed her decisions. The idea of putting distance between herself and those influences now seemed even more necessary, a way to finally understand what she really wanted for herself, without her father's shadow or the demands of Young Industries. When Noah returned home, He noticed the unusual silence in the house and realized Sarah was avoiding him even more obviously. He respected the space she seemed to need, though each moment of silence felt like a slow knife cutting into their relationship. He had felt a genuine connection and a willingness to face everything together, but now he began to sense that Sarah's words about separation might mean something deeper and more final. The next morning, Sarah woke up with resolve. Though the idea of stepping back was painful, she felt it was the only way to be honest with herself and to understand if the love between them was strong enough to withstand all the pressures surrounding it. While Noah was still asleep, she left a note on the kitchen table with a few words explaining her need for time to reflect and left the apartment. Sarah found a small cabin in a nearby town where she settled temporarily. Away from the noise and fast pace of New York, she finally found a space where she could think without constant interference. In the first few days, she felt a strange loneliness, as if she were experiencing the absence of everything that had once defined her. She missed Noah, his way of looking at life, and even the differences that often caused friction between them. But at the same time, this distance brought her an unexpected clarity. For the first time, she understood the extent to which her relationship with her family had influenced her, and how she had let that influence dictate the tone of her marriage. As Sarah adjusted to this new perspective, Noah coped with her absence in the only way he knew, by burying himself in work and taking on preparations for the baby's arrival. The weeks dragged on, but he never stopped hoping she would return. More than ever, he understood Sarah's need for answers, though the prolonged silence made him wonder if she still saw him as part of the future she was deciding. During an evening walk, Sarah received a call from her mother, who had heard about her temporary departure and was trying to convince her to return. The conversation was laden with veiled accusations and emotional manipulation tactics her mother often used, though now, from a distance, they seemed less effective. Sarah realized just how much she had normalized this type of manipulation over her life, something that kept her tied to a role of obedience and loyalty that often clashed with what she truly wanted. At the end of the call, she hung up with the sense that a new chapter in her life needed to begin, a chapter with less control and more freedom of choice. That same night, she sat down at the table and began writing a letter to Noah. She felt he deserved to know what she had been reflecting on and how the experience of separation was transforming her view of their marriage and her own identity. In the letter, she wrote about the love she still felt, but also about her desire to break free from her family's expectations and build an authentic life alongside him. She explained that even with the distance, her affection for him hadn't faded, and she was learning to appreciate the strength he had always shown. She added that more than just a wife or heiress, she wanted to be a true partner, capable of contributing to a genuine future without the influences that had always driven them apart. When Noah received the letter days later, a wave of emotions washed over him. Sarah's words carried the sincerity and vulnerability he had always longed for, a truth she was finally expressing without the barriers imposed by her family. He understood that, although the temporary separation was painful, it was also laying the foundation for a more balanced and genuine relationship. Determined to support her journey, he responded with a letter equally sincere, affirming that he would wait for her and that, regardless of her decisions, he would always be there for her and the baby. Time passed, and the separation gave them both the perspective they needed. Sarah returned to New York a few months later, more determined and more emotionally independent. Noah sensed the difference, and when he saw her cross the threshold, he realized something had changed. A newfound confidence, a real desire to start anew without the weight of external influences. Now the decision was in both their hands, and for the first time, it seemed they had a true chance to build something solid and lasting, based on an authentic and independent choice. After weeks of searching for answers and a clearer path, Sarah was trying to rebuild her life and put her priorities into perspective. When she received an invitation from David to attend a business event, she initially hesitated, aware that his presence always stirred complex memories and emotions. However, the time apart from Noah and the deep self-reflection she had gone through left her with a lingering restlessness, and the idea of going out, socializing, and briefly distracting herself was more tempting than she cared to admit. David had been a past relationship, a connection that lingered in her memory, but what he represented now was more complicated than an old romance. In many ways, he was a version of what Sarah could have been: someone deeply immersed in the corporate world, independent and free from family pressures. Accepting David's invitation wasn't just a casual decision. It was a way of escaping, if only momentarily, the responsibilities and dilemmas waiting for her at home. On the evening of the event, Sarah chose a simple yet elegant dress and headed out. As soon as she stepped into the venue, she was surrounded by a luxurious atmosphere, reminiscent of the young family galas, but with a lightness that surprisingly made her feel at ease. She spotted David from across the room, surrounded by a group of executives, laughing and gesturing confidently. When he noticed her, his eyes lit up, and he quickly made his way over to her with his trademark warm smile. "Sarah, you came. I'm glad you accepted the invitation," he said, lightly holding her hand in a welcoming gesture. "It's been so long since we've seen each other like this. You look different." She smiled, acknowledging the comment. Indeed, she felt different, with a newfound determination and an emotional weight that made her see the world from a more mature perspective. Although she was there to enjoy herself, she realized that David's presence had an unexpected effect. He represented a connection to a part of herself she had left behind, someone who had always encouraged her to explore her potential independently of family expectations. As the night progressed, Sarah and David talked about various topics, from the financial market to his recent travels, and shared memories. The conversation flowed easily, and she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Yet, amid the ease of their interaction, there's also a growing unease, as if something were pushing her toward a deeper self-evaluation. At one point, David invited her to a balcony overlooking the city's illuminated skyline. The lights of New York sparkled in the night, and the sight flooded Sarah with memories of nights spent with Noah, of dreams they had shared about a life together. Sensing her distant gaze, David placed a hand on her shoulder, bringing her back to the present moment. "You know, I've always been here for you, Sarah. I've always believed in your potential. You could have anything you wanted, and I've never understood why you chose to limit yourself. You deserve more," he said, his voice soft but loaded with intent. Those words hit her in an unexpected way. While they sounded like a compliment, she realized they also carried a hidden judgment, a subtle critique of the life she had chosen with Noah. As much as she had taken time apart to find clarity, Sarah knew she still had deep feelings for her husband, and the thought of abandoning all they had built together stirred an indescribable discomfort. David represented the easier path, the life her family wanted for her, but Noah was the choice she had made out of love, a choice that had been genuine and authentic. David's gaze conveyed a mix of understanding and challenge. He knew her well enough to see how her marriage to Noah had transformed her life, but he couldn't accept that she would sacrifice her independence for someone he felt wasn't enough for her. "Sarah, I know you're going through difficult times, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we must stay true to who we are, not to what others expect of us. And you, more than anyone, have the right to choose what's best for you," David continued, moving closer. She looked at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. It was true that with David, she had always been encouraged to be independent and ambitious, but with Noah, she had discovered a profound love that had revealed parts of herself she'd never explored. The divide between these two worlds was now more evident than ever, and Sarah felt she finally needed to choose a path that did not rely on external influences, neither her father's nor David's. At the end of the night, when David offered to accompany her home, she declined politely. The drive back to the apartment was lonely, and as the city lights flickered past the car windows, she allowed herself to reflect deeply. What did she truly want? Not what her father expected, not what David or Noah needed from her, but what made her feel whole. Arriving home, she entered the quiet apartment. Noah was sitting in the living room, surrounded by work documents, but as he saw her walk in, he looked up, surprised by her unexpected return. There was something in his expression that touched her deeply, a mix of relief and uncertainty. Sarah realized that, even with all the differences and doubts, he had never stopped hoping she would return, that she would find a reason to be by his side. Sarah sat down beside Noah on the sofa, and they both remained silent for a while, as if this was finally the moment to confront everything that had been building up between them. She took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth, and realized how much that connection still meant. "Noah, I went to the event with David tonight, and it made me think a lot about what I want for my life," she began, pausing to find the right words. "I know my path has been influenced by what my family wanted, by what people like David represent, but I realized that, no matter how confusing things seem, I want to choose what makes sense for me." Noah listened without interrupting, but his expression betrayed the fear that her words might mean a final separation. He held her hand tightly, as if wanting to reassure her that, whatever decision she made, he would be there to support her, even if that meant letting her go. "Sarah, all I've ever wanted was for you to be happy, even if it means making a choice that doesn't include me. I want you to find your way and feel whole, because without that, our marriage will always be incomplete." Tears welled up in her eyes, moved by his sincerity. Noah was the one person who had always understood and accepted what she needed, even when that meant putting his own desires aside. And at that moment, Sarah realized that true love might be exactly that, in someone who didn't try to control her decisions, but simply wanted her to be at peace with herself. "Thank you, Noah. I know I haven't always done what was right for us, but this is a choice only I can make. And I think, for the first time, I know what it is." The silence turned into an unspoken understanding, and both felt that, regardless of Sarah's choice, something within her had been resolved. With the possibility of separation becoming more real, Noah entered an emotional process of letting go of the expectations and ideas that had previously grounded him in New York. The weeks that followed were filled with sleepless nights and conversations with Sarah, as they both struggled to find clarity and a peace that seemed increasingly impossible to achieve together. Although there was real love between them, they both began to accept that perhaps temporary distance was the only way to rebuild their lives and preserve the part of themselves that made each of them whole. For Noah, leaving would mean more than just a fresh start. It would involve the challenge of remembering the man he had been before his involvement with Sarah and the Jung family, a version of himself unmarked by years of frustrated attempts to be accepted. He spent hours recalling moments with family, friends, and simple memories of his past that sharply contrasted with his current life in New York. Life alongside Sarah and the weight of being entangled with her family had transformed something within him, and now he longed to rediscover the Noah who hadn't felt the need to prove himself or fight for respect. Sarah, on the other hand, faced an internal struggle as she imagined a life without Noah by her side. Although she wanted him to find peace and freedom, the thought of creating a divided family made her feel incomplete, as if an essential part of her world were being taken away. Yet, she understood that perhaps the act of letting him go was, ironically, the best way to hold on to him. Sarah realized that her own identity, her strength, and even her dreams were increasingly entangled with the ambitions of her family and the Jung empire. The distance from Noah allowed her to see that, in order to support his journey, she too would need to find her own independence. Before making a final decision, Noah and Sarah dedicated more time to deep conversations. Each dialogue was an attempt to better understand what truly held them together beyond love and the plans they had made for their child. They spoke of the future they both wanted and what it meant to each of them to be a family. In the quiet hours of the early morning, they revisited everything they had built together, but also the pain and regrets that had marked their relationship. The words were often heavy with emotion, but filled with an honesty they had previously avoided. One afternoon, while discussing the details of their temporary separation, Noah gathered the courage to ask something that had been haunting him for weeks. "Sarah, if you had the chance to start over, without the pressure from your family, do you think you would have chosen me? Or do you think all of this only happened because, somehow, the young world made it easier for us?" The question hit him deeply. The pain in his words was evident. Sarah felt the intensity of his question, realizing that this was a truth he had carried within him from the very beginning. She didn't respond immediately, needing to process his question and confront her own heart. "Noah, I don't know how to answer that without sounding unfair. But what I can say with certainty is that even if I moved forward based on my family's expectations, the love I felt for you was, and still is, real. I just don't know if we would have lasted without the pressures and without their support, because we never really had the chance to try without them." He nodded, understanding the answer and accepting the harsh truth within it. They both knew that part of their relationship had been shaped by the circumstances around them, but the feelings between them had always been sincere, even if they had sometimes been stifled by external demands. Each day, Noah continued the process of detaching himself from life in New York, closing his final professional commitments and making arrangements for fatherhood. He spoke with close friends, explaining his decision to leave, while organizing his belongings and tying up loose ends. It was a quiet goodbye, but every action seemed to give him the strength needed to face the next chapter of his life. When the time finally came for him to leave, Noah and Sarah shared one last conversation, marked by the pain of parting but also by mutual respect. There was an understanding that this distance was, in a way, an act of love and hope for them both. It was a choice that held the possibility that one day they might reunite stronger and more complete, ready to try again without the chains of the past. Noah left the apartment with his suitcase in hand, breathing in the crisp autumn air as he looked at New York one last time, with the eyes of someone finally ready to move on. Sarah watched from the window, her eyes brimming with tears but her heart resolved to give him the space he needed. Noah and Sarah arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in a discreet corner of New York. It was their first reunion since Noah's decision to return to his hometown, and the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and trepidation. Both had spent the past weeks apart, immersed in routines that distanced them from the old pressures. Yet time and distance had only intensified the unresolved questions lingering between them. The desire to meet was inevitable, and though Noah's departure had left emotional wounds, it had also given both of them a fresh perspective. Seeing Sarah walk into the cafe, Noah felt a mix of longing and a discomfort he couldn't quite place. She seemed more at peace, with a calmness he had never seen in her before, as if his absence had allowed her to reconnect with herself in some way. As she made her way to the table where he waited, Sarah sensed that this conversation might finally bring the clarity they both needed to confront the past and understand what truly united them. They sat in silence for a few moments, exchanging looks and shy smiles, but soon realized it was time to confront everything left unfinished. Noah began, his voice tinged with emotion. "Sarah, our story has had so many highs and lows, but I think the last thing I wanted was for us to end things like this, separating without ever really understanding what we mean to each other. These weeks apart, they were harder than I expected." She nodded, listening to his words with an intensity that showed how much she too had reflected. During their time apart, Sarah had rediscovered her own worth and had come to see just how much her family's expectations had shaped her, not just in her career ambitions, but also in her relationship with Noah. The time away had shown her that her life didn't need to be defined by the pressures and expectations of the Jung family. "I understand, Noah. It was hard for me too, but I think I finally found a part of myself that's been hidden all this time. For years, I was living to meet other people's demands, losing sight of who I really am, and with you, I let things build up without realizing how much it was affecting us." Noah sighed, as if her words confirmed something he had always known, but had never dared to say aloud. "I know, Sarah. I know the pressure was always there, and I think we were both, in a way, carrying a weight that wasn't ours to bear. But even with all of that, I never stopped believing in us. The question is, can we truly sustain this love, or has it been worn down by the expectations surrounding us?" Sarah fell silent, feeling the weight of his words, but she knew she had to be honest. For Noah, it was clear that their love had been real, but it was also tainted by doubts, by the sense that they were both sacrificing themselves to fit into a reality that didn't fully represent them. "Noah, the truth is, as much as I love you, I think I'm only now beginning to understand what it means to choose my own path. And that choice, it has to include you in a way that doesn't make me feel pressured, but whole. What I mean is that maybe we need to get to know each other all over again, without my family's influence, without the interference that made us lose our way." He smiled a sad smile, yet one filled with understanding and acceptance. Noah knew she was right, that a true chance for a fresh start would require them both to see each other beyond family pressures and career expectations that had shaped not only their relationship, but also their individual identities. "Sarah, I feel like we need this restart too, but I'm also scared. Scared that no matter how hard we try, we'll end up in the same cycle again. But on the other hand, I never imagined a life without you, without us being US." She looked at him, realizing how much he still loved her and how much he wanted to fight for something special and unique. His sincerity deeply moved her, and she realized that despite all the problems that had come between them, there was still something genuine that bound them, something that could be rebuilt if they were both willing to confront the past without reservation. "Then let's do it, Noah. Let's try to start over, but without the illusions, without the pressure. I think we need to give ourselves the chance to rediscover each other as partners, as people who chose to be together, but respect each other's boundaries and dreams." They continued talking, exploring the details of the wounds that had accumulated over the years. They shared moments of frustration, hurt, but also tenderness and affection, remembering the reasons they had fallen in love. Noah admitted that he often felt inadequate around her family, and that the constant struggle for acceptance had left him on the defensive. Sarah, in turn, confessed that she had allowed her family's vision to dominate her decisions, unaware of how much it undermined his confidence and their love. As the afternoon wore on, with the cafe nearly empty and the sun setting outside, Noah took Sarah's hands, entwining his fingers with hers, feeling the familiarity and security of that gesture. They were both tired but also renewed, as if the weight of the past had finally begun to dissipate, leaving room for an uncertain but promising future. "So, what do you think about starting slowly, like we're getting to know each other all over again?" he suggested, a small smile playing on his lips. She smiled back, her eyes bright with a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. "I think that's exactly what we need, Noah. Let's give ourselves that chance." After their intense conversation, Noah and Sarah decided they needed a break from the routines and accumulated problems in New York. They wanted the chance to reconnect and see if, away from the pressures and expectations of their lives, they could rediscover what still united them. Both felt that a trip might provide the necessary distance to reevaluate what they truly wanted for the future together or not. Noah suggested they go to a small town on the East Coast that he had visited as a young man. It was a peaceful place surrounded by mountains and clear water beaches, a place that made him feel at peace and connected him to what he most valued. Sarah agreed, feeling a renewed curiosity about the places that were significant to him, as if exploring Noah's world was a way to see him without the filters imposed by her own family and the struggles they had faced. In the days leading up to the trip, both were filled with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. For Noah, this was a chance to show Sarah a more authentic side of himself, a side he feared he had lost over the years. For Sarah, the trip represented an opportunity to rediscover the lightness of the love that had always connected them, a lightness that had been lost amid family demands and responsibilities. As they got into the car and left New York behind, Sarah looked at Noah and smiled, feeling immediate relief as the urban landscape transformed into open fields and tree-lined roads. It seemed that, finally, the fast pace of their lives was slowing down, and for the first time in a long time, they could breathe. During the first few hours of the trip, they kept the conversation light, purposely avoiding any mention of marriage or family tensions. Noah talked about childhood memories, about friends from school, and about weekends spent exploring the countryside. Sarah laughed, listening to his stories of youthful adventures and mischief, realizing he was more relaxed and spontaneous than he often was in New York. As the mountains began to appear on the horizon, Sarah felt a growing connection that reminded her of the beginning of their relationship. It was the feeling of being beside someone with whom she could be herself, free from the barriers that had always come between them. Noah, on his part, felt increasingly at ease, as if this trip were a chance to share his world with her without fear of judgment or disapproval. They arrived at their destination at sunset, and Noah had chosen a simple but charming inn with an impressive view of the ocean. The place exuded tranquility, with only a few cabins scattered across the hillside and a small porch where they could watch the sunset. As they settled in, the simplicity of the setting gave them a peace they hadn't felt in a long time, as if everything they had carried with them had been left behind in New York. That first night, they decided to have dinner on the porch, lit only by a few candles and the distant glow of the moon over the sea. The conversation that had started light slowly turned more profound. Noah, with a more serious tone, confessed to Sarah how much he had always felt pressured to be more, so her family would accept him, and how, no matter how hard he tried, he never felt he was enough. "Sarah, that was one of the reasons I felt so stifled. I know you loved me and tried to protect me, but there was a part of me that got lost every time I had to fight to be accepted," he said, with a firm but vulnerable look. She listened in silence, his words resonating deeply. She realized how much her choices, even unconsciously, had contributed to the strain in their relationship. Noah had always been sincere, always willing to fight, but she now understood that he also needed someone who valued him for who he was, without the need to live up to an ideal. "Noah, I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. I know I allowed my family's expectations to interfere between us. Maybe I never made it clear that you were more than enough for me, and that's something I regret. But what I really want now is for you to feel free to be yourself, and maybe this trip is a first step toward that." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Both were realizing that years of accumulated expectations had taken a toll, and that to truly rediscover each other, they would need to reconnect in a genuine way, free from external pressures. The next morning, they decided to explore the mountain trails, an idea Noah suggested so Sarah could experience what he so loved about the simplicity of nature. They walked for hours, surrounded by tall trees and the sound of leaves dancing in the wind. Along the way, Noah found a hidden river, a spot reminiscent of his childhood adventures, and suggested they rest there. Sitting on the rocks by the river, the sound of the flowing water brought a calmness that seeped into their conversation. Noah dipped his feet in the water, laughing at the cold, and Sarah did the same, feeling like a teenager again. Without realizing it, the problems and tensions between them began to dissolve, and they started rediscovering each other in the purity of the moment, as if they were meeting parts of themselves that had been forgotten over the years. When they returned to the inn, the atmosphere between them was different. There was a freshness, a lightness, as if they had taken a step toward something new and deeper. The following night was filled with conversations about the future, but this time, the plans were less ambitious and more genuine. They didn't talk about how they would face the young family or the demands of Sarah's career. Instead, they dreamed of simple things like having a small, cozy home where they could raise their child in peace, away from tensions and pressures. Watching the glow in Sarah's eyes, Noah felt that, for the first time in a long while, they were truly aligned. He sensed that the weight of accumulated frustrations had lifted, as if they had finally found a balance between the past and what they wanted for the future. Sarah, too, realized that their love had always been the core of everything, and that it was the only thing that truly mattered. The days passed quickly, but every moment was enjoyed with an intensity and presence they rarely experienced before. The simplicity of the trip, free from distractions and conflicts, allowed them to connect in a way that felt new. At the end of the week, they knew the decision they would make upon returning to New York would be significant, but they also felt that now they had a solid foundation to face whatever path they chose together. In the months following their decision to start anew, Noah and Sarah immersed themselves in a fresh routine that combined personal growth with the restructured intimacy they both sought. Each focused on their respective commitments, finding in their mutual support the foundation needed to face the challenges of their individual lives, all while striving to keep the spark of complicity and love alive between them. Yet, behind these advances, there remained a lingering question. Would these changes be enough to finally overcome the barriers that had appeared? Noah, now firmly established in his new law office, felt an unprecedented satisfaction working independently, free from the oppressive pressure of corporate affairs. His decision to handle local cases and dedicate himself to smaller causes filled him in ways he had never experienced while working under the shadow of the Jung Industries. His small, functional office was beginning to earn the trust of the local community. Seeing the impact of his work on people's faces and the sincere gratitude he received showed him that he had finally found his true calling. This sense of fulfillment also made him more present and receptive at home, where each professional achievement seemed to strengthen his capacity to be a devoted partner and future father. Meanwhile, Sarah was continually adapting to the new work model she had set for herself. Her decision to set clear boundaries with her family demanded more strength than she had anticipated, but it also allowed her to finally take control of her career. Aware that her family's resistance might increase over time, Sarah stood firm, dedicating herself only to projects that resonated with her values and wouldn't disrupt the new life structure she so valued. This delicate balance still challenged her daily, but Noah's support and the serenity they had gained from their trip helped her navigate her dilemmas without the weight she had previously carried. At home, Friday nights became a cherished ritual. These nights were reserved for just the two of them, free from external distractions, where they recreated the lightness and peace they had discovered on their trip. One of these nights stood out as particularly meaningful. Noah prepared a simple home-cooked meal, inspired by his mother's recipes from his childhood. As he cooked, Sarah watched, charmed by the skill and care he poured into each detail. Seeing the genuine pleasure he took in sharing that moment with her, Sarah realized just how far they had come. During dinner, as they discussed the changes they had experienced and their hopes for the future, Noah brought up an idea that had been on his mind for some time. "Sarah, I've been thinking, what if, instead of just focusing on the changes we're making, we plan something special for the baby? Not just the nursery and essentials, but something that symbolizes the start of our new phase as a family." She smiled, surprised and moved by his suggestion. Though they had discussed the future since they returned, this was the first time Noah had spoken about the baby in such an intimate and meaningful way, not merely as a responsibility, but as a celebration of everything they were building together. "I would love that, Noah. I think we really need something to symbolize this, a reminder for both of us, and for our child, that we're here, committed to each other and to him," Sarah replied, her eyes misty with emotion. From that night on, they began planning a small ceremony to mark this new chapter together. They decided that, instead of a formal celebration, it would just be the two of them, a commitment to renewal and support without the pressures of external expectations. The goal was to affirm their promise to be true to each other, and to pledge to their child that they would raise him with the freedom and respect they themselves had fought so hard to achieve. On the day of the ceremony, they returned to the park where they had first met. Although they knew the journey would be full of challenges, both felt stronger and more aware of the importance of each step. Holding Sarah's hands, Noah promised to continue seeking harmony between the love and individuality each of them needed, while Sarah pledged to prioritize their bond over any outside influence. The ceremony was a quiet yet profound demonstration of their willingness to build a new life together. Afterward, Noah and Sarah returned home feeling more connected and hopeful than ever. However, they were both aware that this renewal of vows and feelings was only the first step in a long path of rebuilding. The weeks that followed were an exercise in patience, understanding, and adaptation, as each tried to balance their dedication to the relationship with their individual commitments. Noah continued to grow his law practice, which gradually became known in the community for its personal and ethical approach. With the trust of his clients, Noah felt he had finally found his place in the professional world, something he had always wanted from the beginning of his career. Still, there were moments of uncertainty and daily challenges, but he faced them with a lightness he had never possessed while trying to fit into the corporate world of the Youngs. Sarah, on the other hand, faced a more complicated reality. As she persisted in her new work model at Young Industries, without compromising the boundaries she had set, she encountered constant criticism and pressure. Her father, James, made it clear he disapproved of her lack of commitment, as he called it, and never missed an opportunity to remind her how her decisions could jeopardize the family legacy. Each meeting and conversation with him weighed heavily, making the atmosphere tense and uncomfortable. Nevertheless, she stood her ground, remembering the promise she had made to herself and to Noah. One evening, after an especially grueling day at the company, Sarah came home exhausted, but found Noah waiting for her with a simple yet thoughtfully prepared dinner. The sight moved her deeply. It was a gesture of love and support that starkly contrasted with the coldness of her day. As they ate, Noah noticed her fatigue and gently held her hand, asking in a soft tone, "How was your day?" She took a deep breath, debating whether to share the frustrations that weighed her down. Deciding to open up, she finally shared the pressures she had been facing and how challenging it was to reconcile her family's expectations with the new path she had chosen. "Today, my father reminded me once again how much he thinks I'm wasting my position by setting boundaries. He doesn't understand, Noah. He doesn't want to understand," she said, her eyes welling up. "Sometimes I feel like I'm torn between two lives, trying to be true to who I want to be and to what's expected of me." Noah listened carefully, feeling her pain as his own. He knew how much this internal struggle weighed on her and felt an instinct to protect her. But he understood that this was a journey Sarah needed to undertake to break free of the chains that had always bound her. "Sarah, I know this is hard, but you're being incredibly brave. I see the strength you put into every decision and how committed you are to creating a future that's truly ours. And that means the world to me." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. His support was a relief that strengthened her and reminded her she wasn't alone in her battle. As time passed, they began adopting new habits to keep alive the connection they had rebuilt. On weekends, they dedicated themselves to preparing for the baby. Together, they set up the nursery, carefully selecting each detail from wall colors to toys and furniture. Each choice reflected a piece of both of them, and the process became a kind of renewal ritual, a quiet celebration of the future they were creating. Noah took care of the practical details, while Sarah added her creativity and vision to give the room a warm and magical atmosphere. It was a shared experience that brought them closer, building a strong foundation of support and affection. One of the most memorable moments was when they found an old rocking chair at a used furniture store. Noah spotted it first and immediately imagined himself there, rocking the baby on peaceful nights, telling stories and creating memories. Sarah noticed his expression, and upon seeing the sparkle in his eyes, understood how important it was for him to be part of every moment as a father. She touched his shoulder and smiled, affirming with a simple gesture that this was the future she wanted as well. "This will be our little haven, Noah," she said, with renewed certainty. The weeks passed, and they embraced their new routine with an enthusiasm they hadn't felt in years. Still, Though their relationship was stronger, both knew they needed to resolve lingering emotional issues before they could truly turn the page. One afternoon, Sarah proposed something unexpected. "Noah, I think we need to talk about everything that happened in the past, once and for all. About the contract my father created, the pressures, and about David." Hearing David's name brought a slight discomfort, but Noah understood that her intention was to clear away any remaining resentments. He knew facing those issues would be difficult, but also understood that they couldn't move forward with unhealed wounds. That night, they sat on the couch and Sarah opened her heart, explaining the circumstances that had led to her father's interference, the insecurities she herself had felt, and how she had allowed those external forces to affect their marriage. She admitted that David had been a reminder of what she thought she wanted, but that, in reality, he represented a life she could never truly have while still bound by her family's expectations. "Noah, I'm sorry for allowing these influences to come between us. I was torn, and it was unfair to you. But now I see that it was all an illusion, a search for an ideal that was never real to me. What I truly want is something simple, something we already have here." Noah listened, and while her words stirred bitter memories, he could see that she was speaking with a transformative sincerity. He felt that the person before him was someone renewed, someone who finally understood the value of building a life grounded in love and mutual respect, free from the pressures of others. "Sarah, I've always wanted to believe you loved me above all, but sometimes it was hard to see that with everything surrounding us. Now I can see that you're different, and that gives me hope. Hope that together, we can create a new story, one that's just ours." Their conversation extended into the early hours, each confession relieving shadows of the past and replacing them with a sense of relief and reconciliation. In the end, Noah and Sarah embraced in a silence that expressed more than words ever could. It was a hug of forgiveness, understanding, and renewal. From that moment, their relationship took on a new depth and intimacy built on truth and respect. Noah and Sarah knew they would still face challenges, but for the first time, they felt genuinely prepared to face them together. After returning to New York, Sarah couldn't ignore the growing sense that she needed to carve her own path. The time she'd spent reflecting on her identity and the desires she'd kept hidden had sparked a new drive for independence. She no longer wanted to be just the heiress subject to young industry's demands, yet she didn't want to abandon her ambition and creativity either. For the first time, Sarah saw the potential to build something that truly reflected who she was, without the shadow of her family's legacy. On a quiet evening, she sat down with Noah to share this decision. He noticed her anxiety, but also saw a newfound resolve in her eyes. He understood the weight of this choice. He knew that, for Sarah, stepping away from a predictable, secure path to pursue something of her own would be a tremendous challenge. He leaned forward, ready to listen with all the support he could offer. "Noah, I've thought about this a lot, and I've realized I need to build something of my own, free from the company's restraints. I want to develop a project that's truly mine, where I can be recognized for who I am and not just for the name I carry," she confessed, her voice resolute yet tinged with vulnerability. Noah smiled, feeling a pride he struggled to put into words. He had witnessed every step of her transformation and knew how hard she'd fought to reach this decision. "Sarah, that's the best thing I could hear from you. And I want you to know I'll be by your side every step of the way. Whatever you need, whatever you decide to build, I'm here to support you." Sarah's eyes sparkled at Noah's encouragement. She knew his support was invaluable, but she was also aware that the path she'd chosen wouldn't be easy. Still, the decision to forge her own journey filled her with renewed energy, like she could finally breathe free from the constant pressure of family expectations. In the days that followed, Sarah began sketching the first outlines of what her company would be. She didn't intend to compete directly with Young Industries. Her goal was something more personal and meaningful. She decided she would work in consulting for social impact startups, helping small businesses with environmental and social causes grow sustainably. This focus aligned with her values, and she knew this market was expanding, with increasing demand for more human-centered and conscientious initiatives. Meanwhile, Noah saw an opportunity to assist Sarah, offering his legal expertise to help structure her new company and guide her through the initial steps. Their early meetings, however, brought some unexpected challenges. While they shared a vision for the project, Noah and Sarah had differing perspectives on practical matters. Noah, with his legal background and focus on organized processes, suggested more traditional, meticulous strategies, while Sarah wanted to explore bolder, more flexible ideas. The discussions were intense, but they realized these differences were actually complementary. Noah began supporting Sarah practically and strategically, helping her prepare necessary documents, structuring internal policies, and organizing contracts with partners. He meticulously reviewed every detail, now acting as a guide and advisor in the company's foundation. Sarah felt empowered by Noah's presence by her side, at the same time, learned to trust her own judgment, making final decisions with the confidence that this new venture was, at last, a true extension of herself. To launch the project, Sarah prepared a presentation and invited potential partners and investors to a small, private event. Noah watched her as she outlined her vision and introduced the company's goals, captivated by the confidence she exuded. It was clear that, away from her family's shadow, Sarah was thriving, and he couldn't have been prouder to witness that transformation. He knew her journey was just beginning and that, like all ventures, there would be ups and downs, but the renewed spirit he saw in her was fuel enough to tackle any challenge. The event was a success, and Sarah managed to attract interest from a few investors who were eager to support her project. After the event, as they walked home together, Noah wrapped his arm around her, conveying the support and love that had always strengthened her. "You were incredible, Sarah. Watching you today was like seeing the person I always knew you could be. This is the start of something very important, and I'm so happy to be part of it." Sarah smiled, deeply moved, squeezing his hand with gratitude. She was aware that her journey had taken a new turn, and Noah's unwavering support was the anchor that kept her grounded and confident. Sarah's father, James, was beginning to realize that her determination to carve her own path was not a passing phase, but a profound transformation. He observed her company's progress, still skeptical, yet intrigued by her success and the confidence she exhibited, a confidence he'd never seen in her when she was under Jung Industries' control. Their conversations, once tense and filled with criticisms, now took on a more respectful tone, almost as if they silently understood that Sarah had found her true calling. One evening, James asked to meet her at a quiet restaurant. Sarah hesitated before accepting, imagining this might be yet another attempt by her father to persuade her back into the company. But when she arrived, she saw him sitting there, looking somewhat different, perhaps a bit more vulnerable. She took her seat, waiting patiently as he seemed to search for the right words. "Sarah, I never imagined I'd say this, but I see you're doing something important, something that goes beyond what I always envisioned for you," he admitted, his voice laced with a sincerity she hadn't expected. She looked at him, surprised and cautious, trying to grasp the true motivation behind this shift. James was a man of pride and firm convictions, and to hear this recognition, albeit reluctant, signaled that the barriers between them might be starting to give way. "Dad, I know this isn't easy for you, and I understand how much you believed Jung Industries was my only path. But this project, it's where I finally feel I'm being true to myself." Her voice was calm yet held a firmness he couldn't ignore. James nodded, and a silent understanding settled between them as he gazed at her with a distant look, perhaps trying to identify traits in her that he had previously overlooked. "Sarah, I believe I underestimated you. Not because I didn't see your potential, but because I feared you wouldn't need me to succeed. Perhaps I never admitted it, but watching you build something on your own shows me a strength I should have valued more," he said, his words tinged with recognition and regret, which was rare for a man like him. She knew that this was more than a simple compliment. It was a silent permission to pursue her dreams. For the first time, she felt he saw her as an independent and capable person, not just an extension of the company and legacy he'd built. James took a deep breath before continuing, this time in an even more unexpected tone. And as for Noah, I see he's brought out qualities in you that I never imagined. For a long time I doubted him, thinking he was a threat to the plans I had for you. But now I realize that without him, you might never have arrived where you are today. He's a good man, Sarah. Maybe more than I ever wanted to admit. Sarah's surprise was evident. Her father rarely offered any approval toward Noah, and hearing those words was almost surreal. She felt overwhelmed with gratitude and a peace she had never known. She realized that somehow that moment marked the end of a cycle of resistance and a new phase of acceptance, not only between her and her father, but also for Noah, who had always carried the weight of her family's distrust. That night, Sarah shared the conversation with Noah, moved by her father's unexpected gesture. Noah sat in silence for a moment, processing the impact this would have on their relationship. He knew that, while complete acceptance would take time, this was a significant step for all of them, an opportunity to build a new relationship with Sarah's family. After the restaurant conversation, James couldn't shake his thoughts about Sarah's transformation. Her determination to create her own path, away from the expectations and pressures of Jung Industries, was a change he'd never thought her capable of pursuing. He watched this new version of his daughter with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and to his own astonishment, a hint of pride. He realized that Sarah's resistance went beyond simple rebellion. It was, in fact, a display of strength and authenticity that he was, perhaps for the first time, beginning to respect. This realization unsettled him, making him question the values that had always dictated his relationship with his family. In the days that followed, James noticed that Sarah's determination was not temporary. She continued her business plans with a conviction that made it clear there was no room for his interference. James began to look more closely into her project, trying to understand the foundation of the company she was building. Through connections in the business world, he learned that Sarah had gained the interest of several investors, who were quite impressed by her innovative vision for the social impact market. This initial success surprised James, and he began to recognize that his daughter, contrary to his long-held belief, didn't need Jung Industries' support to succeed. Driven by a mix of skepticism and pride, James decided to attend one of Sarah's public events, where she would present her new company to potential partners. He chose not to inform her of his presence, wanting to see her presentation as an anonymous observer. On the night of the event, he slipped into the audience, sitting discreetly at the back of the room. He watched Sarah take the stage with a poised stance, a steady, clear voice, and noticed the confidence she exuded as she presented her vision. Every word was carefully chosen, and each aspect of the plan was explained with precision and passion. As Sarah discussed her company's goals and values, James found himself both incredulous and respectful of her grasp of what she had created. It was more than a phase or a whim. It was a vocation that seemed to come from the most genuine parts of her personality. He realized that perhaps he had never seen this in her before, because he had always viewed her through the lens of his own expectations. But now, on that stage, she was beyond his expectations. She was free of them, finally moving with the confidence of someone who knew what she wanted. James returned home that night with a feeling he rarely experienced: regret. It was a disquieting sensation, one that made him reflect on every choice, every piece of advice, and every word he had exchanged with Sarah over the years. He thought about how many times he had devalued her aspirations, how often he had underestimated her and placed her in a subordinate position within Jung Industries. He thought about all the times he had ignored the qualities, now emerging with strength qualities he had inadvertently stifled. In the days that followed, James continued to observe Sarah's path and realized that, contrary to his expectations, she was not distancing herself from the family. Instead, she was building something that also filled him with pride, though he wouldn't openly admit it. When he met with industry colleagues, he heard compliments about Sarah's determination and the impact she was already having in the sector. Initially, these comments irritated him. He felt confused and even a bit envious, as though Sarah's success without the company diminished Young Industries' importance. However, little by little, this resistance gave way to a painful understanding. His daughter truly did not need him to succeed. James then decided that he should support Sarah, not as a businessman interested in controlling the business, but as her father. Understanding that her independence was not a threat, but a legitimate achievement, he saw for the first time an opportunity to make amends, to offer the support he had long withheld. However, he knew this acceptance would be incomplete if he didn't also change his view of Noah, whose presence by Sarah's side he had always contested. Determined to rethink his stance, James decided to speak with Noah personally, without Sarah present. He called Noah and asked to meet in his office, suggesting they could settle some pending matters. Though wary, Noah agreed to the invitation, eager to understand what motivated his father-in-law to reach out so directly. When Noah arrived at James' office, he found him more serious than ever. Yet this time he didn't sense the hostility that often defined their encounters. Instead, James seemed slightly embarrassed, a bit uncertain about how to start the conversation. After a few moments of silence, James finally broke the tension with an unexpectedly honest tone. "Noah, thank you for coming. It's not easy for me to say this, but I believe I owe you some recognition. I know that, from the start, I never made you feel part of the family the way I should have. I've always been demanding and, frankly, unfair. But recently, watching what you've done for Sarah, I realized that perhaps I was wrong about you." Noah listened carefully, feeling a mixture of surprise and relief. It was the first time James had admitted, however subtly, an error in his judgment. He felt a pang of satisfaction but remained composed, waiting for him to finish. "I know I was hard on you, Noah, and I know that over the years, you sacrificed a lot to be by my daughter's side. I never thought anyone outside the standards I set could be enough for her. But now, seeing the path Sarah has chosen and how you've stood by her, I understand that maybe I need to reconsider what enough really means." There was a pause, and Noah felt a surge of emotions as he heard these words. James, the man who had always been the greatest obstacle in his marriage, was finally acknowledging him. Not just as a son-in-law, but as an essential part of Sarah's journey, a true partner. And this touched him in an unexpected way. "Mr. Young, I really appreciate your words. It wasn't easy for me either, and I don't think any of us truly understood what was best for Sarah. But regardless of what happened, my commitment to her has always been genuine. I never wanted to replace anything or anyone in her life. I just want her to be happy and have the chance to build the life she truly desires." James nodded, taking in Noah's words and feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He understood that, by supporting Noah, he was in fact supporting Sarah and strengthening the bond they were building. Over time, James' support transformed into something tangible. He began to offer resources and strategic advice to Sarah, not to control the direction of her company, but as an occasional and respectful advisor who understood the limits of his influence. This new stance brought an unexpected balance to the family, and gradually, Sarah realized that her father finally saw her as a self-sufficient and capable woman. The relationship between James and Noah also transformed. Mutual respect grew, and James, once critical and distant, now saw Noah not only as a son-in-law but as a true partner for his daughter. Noah and Sarah found themselves in a new chapter of life, where every challenge seemed to deepen the bond they had built and strengthened over the years. The birth of their child had redefined each experience together, bringing an unexpected harmony and a link that further solidified their relationship. Amid diapers, sleepless nights, and bottles, they were committed to creating a loving and stable environment, reflecting the essence of what they had always envisioned. a family united by genuine and enduring bonds. Their work routines, once a source of tension and distance, now naturally fit into their days. Sarah, having achieved independence by launching her own business, felt accomplished and secure in her position. Her social sustainability consulting firm was growing rapidly, bringing a new kind of recognition, one based on her choices and talents, rather than her family's legacy. Now, when she visited the office, she was no longer the young heiress but a strong, independent woman who had found her place. She had assembled a small, trusted team of people who shared her vision of sustainable business and positive social impact, and who respected her for her leadership and integrity. Noah, in turn, had successfully established the law firm he had always dreamed of. He approached each case with enthusiasm and compassion, helping clients who needed legal guidance without the high-stakes demands of major corporations. Every case he took on was carefully chosen, focusing on projects that made a difference for local people and businesses. For the first time, he felt his work had real purpose, not only fulfilling but aligned with the family atmosphere he and Sarah cultivated. With her constant support, Noah became more confident in his decisions, with a sense of fulfillment and peace that flowed directly into their relationship. At home, their little one was growing fast, and each new gesture and smile brought a sense of joy and wonder. They knew life with a newborn could be exhausting, but they approached these moments as a team. If the baby woke up crying during the night, Sarah or Noah would take turns, sharing the responsibility and the happiness of every little milestone: the first smile, the first sound, the first attempts at communication. The family routine, once so marked by tensions, was now filled with harmony and partnership. For both, home had become a safe haven, a space of affection and companionship where they met as partners and friends, not just husband and wife. On Friday nights, which they always reserved for reconnecting, Noah and Sarah maintained their tradition, now adapted to the presence of their child. During these evenings, they would leave the baby with a trusted sitter and treat themselves to homemade dinners, filled with conversations about the future and the dreams they continued to nurture. Each of these nights reminded them of why they had chosen each other and reaffirmed their commitment to nurturing not just their marriage, but also themselves as individuals. They supported each other, encouraging one another to pursue their goals and celebrating each small victory. Every decision was now shared and discussed, and their relationship had become more balanced, deeper, and more meaningful. One afternoon, Sarah's father, James Young, came to visit and spend time with his grandson. The meeting was emotional because, over the months, he had come to respect his daughter's decision and see Noah in a new light. Yet, even with the changes, James's presence remained a reminder of the long road they had traveled to reach that moment of peace. Sitting beside Noah while watching Sarah play with the baby on the living room rug, James looked at his son-in-law with a sincere expression. "Noah, I have to admit that you managed to do what many wouldn't have. I never made things easy for you, and for that, I owe you an apology." Seeing Sarah happy and fulfilled, it's priceless to me. Noah nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He knew how hard he had fought to prove his worth to Sarah's family, but this moment was proof that it had all been worth it. "Thank you, Mr. Jung. I think in the end all this helped us grow, and having your respect, well, it means a lot to me." James smiled, a genuine smile, and for the first time, he seemed at peace with the life Sarah and Noah had built. He understood now that what united them was solid, built on foundations he himself could not shake, and their relationship had become a testament to the power of resilience and determination. In the months that followed, Sarah and Noah continued balancing work and family life, facing the natural challenges of raising a child and managing their respective careers. Each day was a new opportunity to reinforce the commitments they had made to each other, and for every obstacle, they found strength in the trust they had built over the years. Both of their careers prospered, yet they remained focused on raising their son in a home where love and respect were unconditional. They dreamed that he would grow up understanding the importance of honesty and courage in pursuing his own values. Years later, Sarah and Noah found themselves in a new chapter. Their son, now older, showed an insatiable curiosity about the world and loved hearing his parents' stories. One Saturday night, as the family sat around a backyard fire, Noah and Sarah exchanged glances, recalling the early days of uncertainties and challenges, and felt grateful for the journey that had brought them there. "You know, Noah," Sarah began, her voice calm but full of meaning, "if someone had told me years ago that all this awaited us, I wouldn't have believed it. For a long time, I was afraid to follow my own path. But you showed me that true love doesn't require sacrifice. It requires support and partnership. And for that, for every choice and every moment, I am deeply grateful." Noah smiled, holding her hand. "Sarah, you were always stronger than you thought. Today, I see that what we went through wasn't easy, but that's exactly why everything we've built is so precious to me. This life, our family, it has shown me what really matters." With their son asleep in their arms, wrapped in their care, they sat in silence, watching the flames of the fire and feeling immense gratitude for everything they had lived and built together. Their home was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome and everything they had chosen to preserve. It was a place where love and respect were cultivated daily, where the memories of struggles and reconciliations kept them united and stronger than ever. The love between Sarah and Noah had proven to be an unbreakable bond, transcending differences and difficulties. They knew that, by each other's side, they could face whatever came next. The past, with all its pains and lessons, was now a distant memory that only reinforced the solidity of the life they had created. And in that moment, under the stars, with the warmth of the fire illuminating their faces, they knew that the future they had built together was the ultimate proof that love conquers all so long as it is genuine and nurtured with honesty and commitment. There, together and at peace, Noah and Sarah were ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing that, united, they could face the world.